You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham. UAW President Dennis Williams says what he loves about his union is that the ultimate power of the union is its members, and they make the final decision on contracts. Williams says he'll be meeting with the UAW FCA National Bargaining Committee to discuss the issues at Fiat Chrysler. Williams says he doesn't consider this a setback, but instead considers the membership vote to be part of a process that UAW leadership respects. The tentative Fiat Chrysler deal was rejected by a membership vote this week, largely over a dislike of the two-tier wage system that pays auto workers hired after 2007 less than veteran workers. Economist Richard Wolff says this UAW worker vote is a very significant event.
It's an act of these workers saying no to business as usual with a major car producer. Two big issues were at stake. First, the decision by a majority of workers that they don't like the two-tier system, that they see the injustice of having workers come in, and 40% of Fiat Chrysler are like this, working at $16 to $19 an hour, doing more or less the same as workers getting $28 an hour. It's divisive, it's unjust, and hats off to the workers who made a decision not to go along. And the second issue is equally distrust of the company, that it will once again dance around the contract and move more production to Mexico. These workers don't want business as usual. They don't trust Fiat Chrysler. And it's sort of ironic that earlier this week, it was revealed that Fiat Chrysler had also underreported deaths and injuries. So they're not trustworthy by the public, and they're not trustworthy by their own workers, but the workers at least had the courage to do something about it.
East St. Louis teachers went on strike Thursday. Union spokesman Dave Comerford tells Workers Independent News the main issue is a big change in the pay structure that will hurt teachers for their entire careers.
The main sticking point is the district is making a demand that would basically be the equivalent of what we're calling a career pay cut for teachers. They basically want to double the number of years it takes to move through their salary schedule.
Comerford says despite the poverty in East St. Louis, community school district finances are solid, and there's no real economic justification for this salary schedule demand. And he says teacher solidarity and community support for the striking teachers is strong.
There are a number of students out on the picket lines carrying signs. There's parents out there. The number of people honking horns has been incredible. When the police force goes by and they're even kind of sounding their louder horns in support of the teachers.
Coalition of 8 national unions Thursday ratified a labor agreement with the American Red Cross. Wages and benefits were improved in the deal. This is the first national contract covering 4,200 Red Cross workers. The Teamsters represent 1,300 of the workers. AFSCME, AFT, CWA, UAW, UFCW, United Steelworkers, and the SEIU represent the rest of the Red Cross workers. You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
It's time for the Rick Smith Show.
I want you to get up now. I want all of you to get up out of your chairs. I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore.
I don't want to abolish government. I simply want to reduce it to the size where I could drag it into the bathroom and drown in the bathtub.
You bet I cut the taxes at the top.
How dare you? How dare you? Go ahead. Make my day.
The Rick Smith Show starts now.
This town gonna be here long after I'm gone. East side, west side, people don't surrender. They've been down, but they still rock on. Oh, and this town is my town. Alright, love or hate, it don't matter. 'Cause I'm gonna stand and fight. This town is my town. She got her ups and downs, but love or hate, it don't matter. 'Cause this is my town.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks for being here today on the big program. Lots of things to get to, lots to talk about. A little bit about the charters. Remember Wednesday we talked about the Wild West of funding. Going to get a little bit of that with Representative James Roebuck. Also in the second hour, it's the jobs. It's the economy, stupid. Some job numbers out. Not so good. What can we do to turn things around? What can we get do to get things moving. Also in the third hour, what's going on here in Pennsylvania? The budget stunt that was and then was shot down. Also the insanity of, well, we should just make a reality TV show out of what the Pennsylvania GOP is doing. We just, if we're not going to get a budget on time and we're not going to get people to do their jobs on time and sit down and even make it look like you're attempting, and this is I think what has people ripped off. I understand if you're working hard and you're there every day, as the governor has been. If you're there every day and every day you're at the table and you're butting heads and you're doing that, and still nothing comes of it because there's not enough give and take or whatever. People understand that. When it appears that, well, we've got other things to do. You got one freaking job. But when it appears that we got other things to do, like nonsensical English-only legislation, I think then we start going, all right, there's something wrong here. And we'll talk about that as well. Your thoughts on the Big Friday, questions, comments, whatever's on your mind. 1-888-520-RICK, 1-888-520-7425. Happy Manufacturing Day here in the U.S. Yes, this is Manufacturing Day, so a happy one. Sad news, though, on Manufacturing Day. The Labor Department announced that we have lost another 9,000 manufacturing jobs. That brings us just in the last 2 months to about 28,000 lost manufacturing jobs. And, August was 19,000, this 9,000 September month, and probably going to be revised higher. The job numbers were out, not so good news. And the thing that gets me is, I go back to what the president had wanted to do and said at the beginning of, this last term, we're going to create 1 million new jobs in manufacturing. And look, he can't wave a magic wand. I know a lot of people think, oh, the president's, he's the man. And maybe he is, but not in this vein. He doesn't have a magic wand to go, 1 million new jobs. Doesn't do that. You know what he could do? He could propose legislation. He could propose an idea. He could pursue a line of thought that would say, hey, let's build some stuff. Let's have a stimulus package. Oh, no, you didn't just say that, Rick. Yeah, I did. And I've been saying it for a while. We need to be rebuilding stuff. We need things. And what gets me, I'm one of the people who notice, and this is what's sad. We have sadly become a society where we don't really care. At least I don't think. A lot of the people, when you have individual conversations with people about, buying things made here in the U.S., there's an awful lot of flag waving and patriotism and chest thumping. Yes, I will buy American-made products. But when you look at their clothes, you look at their cars, you look at their stuff, the things that they consume, not much thought went into that. And as the folks at the American Alliance for American Manufacturing have pointed out, if every American would just say, you know what, I am going to, with forethought and great opportunity, I'm going to spend just $64 on an American-made stuff. I'm going to seek out, when I go to buy something, be it a widget or whatnot, who knows. But I'm going to look for the label. I'm going to turn it over and I'm going to go made in where. And if it says made in the U.S., that's what we buy. Just $64 would create about 200,000 jobs here in the U.S., would create new jobs. And that would also be, you might actually save your own in the process. So they are saying, hey, let's take the pledge this year from this Happy Manufacturing Day to the next. Let's see if we can bump that job number up, which, as the president said, 1 million new manufacturing jobs. Right now, we're at about 370,000. A long way to go. But if we said, $64, I can do that. Create 200,000. Let's say we doubled that. Let's say we even tripled it. Well, we triple it. We're somewhere near that number. And we bring manufacturing back to the U.S. And, the other day I was when I gave my little spiel, someone had asked a question about manufacturing. You bring these jobs back, and look, we're never going to see the massive booms that we've seen in the past. We're just not. We're not going to see a Bethlehem Steel again that employs a couple 100,000 people, because we've automated and mechanized, and we've done all of the robotics and all of that stuff too. But we can bring back industry that's going to pay a reasonable wage for workers to be able to support their families. And this is something we've talked about for some time here on the program. This idea that there's dignity in work, that factory jobs are good jobs, and as all jobs should be. And I got a bunch of emails. We talked about this on Wednesday. Yesterday, I couldn't get a sentence out without coughing, and nobody wanted to hear me do that. But I got a bunch of emails, and I had a good day yesterday of back and forth with emails. And, this idea that there are substandard jobs is kind of ludicrous to me. And that we should be encouraging all of the jobs that we still have, because you can't outsource a lot of things. I know they want to, but you can't. Those should be able to support a family. We shouldn't have to go begging for handouts. We shouldn't have to go to the food banks. We shouldn't have to ask for food stamps. We shouldn't have to ask for heating assistance and school lunch programs and all of that's there. Because I keep going, here's what's going on. We have a massive redistribution of wealth going on in this country. All the money that we're spending, the billions of dollars that we're spending on social programs to prop up the wealth class, not the poor. We keep them from basically rioting. And I keep saying, maybe that's what we need. But it's a redistributive mechanism from taxpayers to the wealth class, by not having to pay wages for the wealth that they're sucking out of the work that these folks are doing. You go, oh, Rick, that's just ludicrous. No, think about it for a minute. McDonald's, Burger King, Wendy's, all of these companies are big, behemoth, wealthy corporations who make billions in profit every year. And if they're not, then we've got to wonder where that money's going, because it's not going to paying the wages of the workers who are there every day, punching the clock, handing stuff out the window, cooking, whatever, cleaning, whatever. It's not going to them. You know who's paying them? We are. We're subsidizing the hamburger. We're subsidizing this by having cheaper wages. Now, what if we took that money that we're giving to McDonald's and Burger King and Walmart and all of them and said, you know what? We're going to invest in education. We're going to invest in roads and bridges. We're going to invest in rebuilding this country. We're going to invest in having another who knows what program. Maybe, hey, let's talk about going to Mars. I'm all in favor of it. Even if the right wing in this country thinks it's a liberal plot that someone said there's water there. I'd love to find out. Let's go. But stop and think about it for a minute. How much money is being sucked out of the well of the working class to fund this billionaire class that we have? And I know we're a classless society, right? Nonsense. The reality is, we don't start making stuff here. The reality is, if we don't start sharing the wealth a little bit here, we're going to continue to divide and divide and divide until we're a two-class system. Those who have, and then everybody else. And education is going to be one of those lines. And you look at the money that we spend on education, you look at where it's going. It's not going into the classroom. And when we come back, we're going to talk with James Roebuck, Pennsylvania State Representative, about his recent report that's showing just where some of that education money, our tax dollars, where that's ending up. Let's take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
And that big old building was a textile mill. It fed our kids and it paid our bills. But they turned us out and they closed the doors. We can't make it here anymore. You see those pallets piled up on the loading dock? They're just gonna sit there till they rot, 'cause there's nothing to ship, nothing to pack, just busted concrete and rusted tracks. The empty storefronts around the square. There's a needle in the gutter and glass everywhere. You don't come down here unless you're looking to score. We can't make it here anymore.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. Did you enjoy a cup of coffee to start your day this morning? Well, on this day in labor history, the year was 2007. That was the day that Starbucks agreed to post information about union rights on an employee bulletin board at its store in Grand Rapids, Michigan. The International Workers of the World, or Wobblies, were attempting to organize the baristas at that store. The IWW accused Starbucks of interfering with the right to form a union. Starbucks management consistently points to better than average benefits provided for their employees as a reason against unionization. Starbucks management decided to settle the Grand Rapids dispute by letting the union information to go up before the case went through the full Labor Review Board process. This was just one incidence of the IWW's attempt to organize Starbucks workers. The IWW began its outreach efforts at Starbucks in 2004. One of the most pressing issues facing the baristas was scheduling. Like many in the service industry, they are subject to so-called flexible scheduling. Computer software programs create scheduling aimed at reducing labor costs. The result of these programs is often inconsistent and unpredictable hours. This scheduling makes it difficult for workers to establish a budget or plan for childcare. In 2014, the New York Times published a story on this kind of scheduling, featuring the difficulties faced by one Starbucks worker. In a study published also in 2014, they showed that Starbucks stores had 14% less employees on average in 2011 through 13 than they did in 2005 through 2007. Starbucks is not alone in using computer scheduling. Efforts to cut labor costs continue to have devastating impact on the day-to-day lives of workers in the service economy. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
This is the Media Matters Minute. I'm John Kerr. Likely incoming House Speaker Kevin McCarthy is coming under fire from all sides for telling Fox News' Sean Hannity that the Select Committee on Benghazi is basically just a partisan effort to attack the administration. Even Joe Scarborough, the conservative co-host of MSNBC's Morning Joe, wouldn't come to McCarthy's defense. Let's take a listen.
It's not like he fumbled the ball up, coughed the ball up a news hour or something under withering cross-examination. He went to the friendliest confines with Hannity and made the mistake there.
Yes, I mean, it makes it all the more.
Scarborough suggests Fox News has become a safe haven for conservatives to discuss Benghazi. As Media Matters has documented, Fox News played a role in convincing House Republicans to establish a select committee on Benghazi, a move it has hyped for more than 20 months and in more than 1,000 evening news segments. For more on this and other stories, please visit MediaMatters.org.
Chances are, when you took a shower this morning, an AFSCME member made sure that water was clean. When you drove to work, an AFSCME member maintained the road. When you rode an elevator, an AFSCME member inspected it. I'm David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. AFSCME members enforce regulations, keep prisoners behind bars, take care of patients, protect the environment, and more. The work isn't glamorous, the salaries aren't high, but AFSCME members serve the public in every aspect of our daily lives. Chances are, you'll never see that AFSCME member working in a sewage plant, diving underwater to repair a bridge, or answering a 911 call. But aren't you glad they do? For more information, visit AFSCME13.org. We are AFSCME.
If the only choice available were public schools, we'd have better public schools. But the wealthy in many, many cities have opted out of the public school system. I mean, they may vote for the bond issues out of conscience, and some of them may engage philanthropically. But with their own kids, they send them to private schools. And by having this division, essentially between rich and poor in schools, the rich get the education they want to get for their kids, and a lot of them have a conscience, so they try to do something for somebody else, but they don't try the same way as they would as if the kids were in those schools.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Our billionaire friend, Warren Buffett there, being very honest, and you got to give him credit, at least a little bit of honesty. And we were going to talk with Representative James Roebuck about his piece on the Wild West of charter school funding. But instead, I decided, you know what? Let's reach out and talk about what's going on in the Senate race. Now we've got a couple of names thrown in. One of the folks going to attempt to take on Pat Toomey next year. Katie McGinty, former chief of staff for Governor Wolf, also a former gubernatorial candidate. Katie, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, Rick, it's always a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So why now? Why are we jumping into this?
You know, it's all about what you're about. It's about working people. Look, I don't have to tell you the statistics, but they really are stunning. We're at a time now where literally 90% of Americans, 90%, have incomes that are less than they were in 1966. 1966. Now, this is at a time when productivity has continued to be on an upward march. So people are working harder. They're working harder, but their incomes just aren't going anywhere. And it's also at a time when in 1980, the ratio of the salary of a CEO to the average working person was 30-1. That ratio today is 300-1. So we know where the wealth increase that comes from the productivity increase has gone. It's not to 90% of Americans because their incomes are 1966 levels. It is to that CEO level whose income is now 300x that of the average working person. And that concerns me because unless everybody who's willing to work hard in this great country has a real chance to get ahead, unless that remains true, then the American dream is only a dream and the country's in trouble. I want to fight for the American dream.
You know, one of the things that I had hoped when President Obama took office in 2009 was that return of reward to work, because, you know, what you just laid out is what we've been talking about for the last decade on this program. Wages have been stagnant. And in fact, if you look at the story just last week in the Washington Post, for men, wages have actually been declining over the last 40 years and women not doing much better. And the reality is when you look at where the wealth is going, it's not going to the people whose hands and backs and lives are creating it. It's going to the very top. And you're absolutely right.
Well, you know, with respect to men's wages, you know, there was a little bit of news in terms of the wage gap between men and women stabilized or maybe even closed a little bit. But unfortunately, that was only true and achieved not because women's wages went up, but because men's wages were frozen or went down.
Exactly.
And that's not the direction we want to go.
So the guy that we've got now, and look, I didn't vote for Pat Toomey, not a big fan. Wasn't thrilled when he was my congressman in Allentown. I'm less thrilled now that he's my senator. Has he been on the side of working people? I mean, when I talk to folks about Pat Toomey, they go, "Oh, he seems like such a nice guy." And I go, "He may seem like a nice guy, but policy-wise, not so much."
Look, he is as fundamentalist and as right as Ted Cruz. He just does a better job of masking that. He's not as flamboyant about it as Ted Cruz. But let's look at the facts. There were only a couple of Republican senators who joined Ted Cruz this week in a vote to shut down the government. And why? Why? Because they want to defund Planned Parenthood. Well, Planned Parenthood provides the health care for 104,000 of Pat Toomey's constituents, 104,000. Even the Republican leadership wasn't for it, but Pat Toomey voted with Ted Cruz, one of only a couple of 3 or 4 Republicans to do so, shut down the government, take away health care from 104,000 women. Number one. Number two, Pat Toomey has refused efforts to call the Chinese out for their currency manipulation, call them out for when they are tanking our markets and taking our jobs. He won't even sign on to letters that are critical of China for how they have destroyed market share for our steel companies, how they've taken steel and other kinds of good commodity jobs from industry in the United States and in Pennsylvania. He won't say a word. He stands to the side and, in fact, leads the charge for more and more of these trade deals that have undermined manufacturing in our country. And, you know, just recently, too, he has been at the tip of the spear trying to kill this Exim Bank. Well, people say, what the heck is that? Well, it's the financial institution that enables our companies to at least have a fighting chance against subsidized players from overseas to sell their goods overseas. GE and Boeing have been very clear that 40,000 manufacturing jobs in Pennsylvania are in jeopardy if we lose that financing tool. And Toomey is not only not fighting against killing that bank, but he's leading the charge to kill it.
You know, I remember after
the
housing bust and then when Wall Street was going down, I still remember Toomey's statement that we needed a harder down. And you look at all of these issues in that world view of, you know, we just needed the market to take care of itself. So if there's mass pain and mass suffering, and in this case, massive job loss and all of that, well, that's just how things have to be. And I fundamentally disagree with that ideology.
Well, here you look, even if, let's say, okay, well then be free, pure free market. Well, right now interest rates are down. If you're a person who believed in the free market, you'd say to everybody, hey, if you've got a loan or a mortgage or anything like that out there, go out there and refinance it and take advantage of the low interest loans, except for Pat Toomey voted against families being able to do just that with their kids' their college loans and college debt. Why would you do that? Why would you vote against enabling families to take advantage of low interest rates and refinance that student debt? But that's what he did.
Well, because you're a Wall Street guy. I mean, everyone knows where his money came from. He was a Wall Street guy, former Club for Growth guy, very right wing. And this is what I try and explain to some of my friends who just see him as the nice guy. Oh, he sends nice letters. He's a decent guy. Other than his policy, his ideology, very dangerous for this country and Pennsylvania.
You know, families today are caught between two kinds of challenges, and these are loving challenges. These are what families exist for. It's what families want to be about. That is raising their kids and now increasingly taking care of their elderly parents. And you want to do that. It's an honor to do that. That's why we live and breathe, so that we can take care of our kids, so that we can honor our parents. But who among us would want to face the prospect of trying to achieve that when you've got a U.S. Senator who is bound and determined to privatize Social Security? Pat Toomey's quote is that Social Security is the biggest, quote, the biggest hoax since the Loch Ness Monster, and that we need to get rid of it. He has said the same thing with respect to Medicare. I know, God rest their soul, 94 and 91, we lost my parents not too long ago. We could not have done it without Medicare. We couldn't have done it without Social Security. These things are absolutely critical, and we've got a big family, all of whom, working and pitching in to help as we need to help. But these are things that people have paid for. These are things that people have been planning on and counting on and need to be able to count on. There's nothing, quote unquote, nice about a U.S. Senator who wants to pull the ground out from under retirement security for our senior citizens and critical help for families who are trying to do right to give their parents a dignified and honorable retirement.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show with Katie McGinty, senatorial candidate. You want to check out our website, katiemcginty.com. We'll get a link at thericksmithshow.com so you can check out where she's at. We've been hearing this quite often, Katie, that, those pensions, all of, that Social Security, those are just luxuries of the past. And I got a rude eye-opening experience this week participating in being a presenter at a focus group where it just the messaging that the right wing has done on those issues, defined benefit pensions, a luxury of the past, Social Security, Medicare, you name it, all of those things that our parents and grandparents built for the future generations. The right wing has done a masterful job of saying, you know what, those are just, you got a better chance of seeing a UFO before you see a Social Security check. I think there's got to be a massive pushback against that.
There absolutely has to be, and I agree with you. It's sort of like if we say it enough, then people become resigned to it. Well, what we should be resigned to is that we will fight for every person who works hard in this country to be able to sustain and support themselves and to be able to look forward to a secure retirement. That's what we have to be about. Look, and none of this is charity. None of this is charity. One, people have worked for those retirement benefits. It has come out of their paycheck and they have earned it. It's theirs. And we can't stand by while people like Pat Toomey are content to take those retirement dollars away. We have to fight for them. Second, it's not charity, because imagine the economic calamity we would have in this country if our senior population was no longer economically secure. Talk about recession.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, if they were in the same rate of poverty that our children are in, I mean, to me, it's disgusting.
Imagine that. You know, Rick, one of the things I have been doing on the campaign trail is standing with hardworking women and men. So I stood with nurses and health professionals at a drug addiction and mental health hospital recently, when after 88% of those nurses voted to form a union, and look, they were not looking out for themselves. They voted to form a union because they found, as their hospitals are going to for-profit models, or they're otherwise getting squeezed, that the advice they were giving in terms of the care for the patients was not being heard. And when someone would make professional suggestions about how to take care of the patients, they were being taken out of the particular wards or the particular part of the hospital they were in and sent to another different one, to the great upset of mental health and drug addiction patients who depend on that continuity and relationship they build with a healthcare professional. And to add insult to injury, this particular hospital was using Medicare dollars to hire outside of Pennsylvania consultants who are good at busting unions and overturning valid, legitimate organizing votes. Yesterday, I was with the steel workers who've been locked out of ATI steel plant, and these workers are being told that they are going to have to subject themselves to unilateral, non-noticed, non-bargained increases in health care costs just at the whim and discretion of management. They're going to have to subject themselves that management can at any time just put them on 12-hour shifts with no break, and that management can take their jobs away and reassign them to supervisors or anyone else with no negotiation, and that the new contracts for the new employees would have zero pensions, zero retirement health care or life insurance. I mean, this is at a time when the CEO's salary is so high that a majority of the shareholders voted against the CEO getting the pay that he's getting.
Yeah, no, but here's the thing that gets me, Katie. You know, as a society, we've become, and I truly believe, as a working class in this country, we've become accustomed to the at-will model. As our workers' compensation law here in Pennsylvania points out, a master-servant relationship. That I think, you know, an entire generation of workers don't have that thought that we should have a voice on the job. We should have rights, that, you know, we should have some say in our pay and our working conditions and how things are done. And I think this is where the right wing and the corporate class, amazing job of beating down organizing campaigns and creating laws that benefit them. I mean, this focus group I participated in, it was all about how they break unions and how they go after the messaging, which, you look at it, the money that they're spending on taking on what is now 6.5% of the private workforce is really quite amazing.
It really is. And I think part of what, look, Americans are so good. They want to just keep giving. People don't like to be thought to be complainers. And I think we need to get out of the mindset that this has anything to do with asking for a handout, or this has anything to do with being a complainer. This is about the backbone of the American economy. What we are trying to do is to make sure that that backbone that used to be strong, that built a strong middle class, that built a manufacturing sector that was the envy of the world, and that also then built our national security through incomparable national defense. That's what we're standing up for. It's the future of the country, and it's a patriotic voice. It's a patriotic voice that says anyone willing to work hard can and should be able to have a good, solid life for themselves and their families. One of the things that I also just came to see up close and personal here over the last couple of weeks, I met with a group of volunteer firefighters, and I talked to them about the grave concern where we've seen such a fall off of volunteer firefighters. And I said to them, look, is this because people are working so hard and they're working 2 and 3 jobs and no one has time? And they looked at me and they said, listen, no offense to anybody, but it's the exact opposite. It's that working families have been pushed out of a lot of communities, and the volunteers are the working families. They said, no offense to wealthier folks, they said, but they don't volunteer to fight fires. So when you're talking about the right to organize, when you're talking about good wages and good living opportunities, the quality of life, you're talking about those families that have been the backbone of our communities, that volunteer as firefighters, that volunteer in the local library, that contribute to the local police department. That's who we're talking about. And I think if people could own that more, then they would hear as unpatriotic those voices that are trying to undermine the economic security of our families.
Excellent point. If folks want to get involved in the campaign, because I'm sure you're taking on volunteers and, of course, money, these campaigns aren't cheap. What do we do?
Well, if folks would tune into our website, which is www.katiemcginty.com, and that's KATIEMCGINTY.com. We'd love to have you, and we are indeed taking many volunteers, and we certainly would welcome any contribution you'd be able to make. We certainly also would welcome your good wishes and your prayers. We're giving it all we got. We've got some momentum. Look out, Pat Toomey, here we come.
Good for you. Last question I've got for you. The big news right now, for me anyways, this Trans-Pacific Partnership Free Trade Agreement. Maybe you've heard of it. Curious, which side of this do you come down on?
No, I'd be opposed to it. Senator McGinty would vote against the TPP. And look, there's lots of reasons. And the two that are most compelling to me, one, for 30 years, two things have followed a similar track. For 30 years, we have had enormous attention on these global trade agreements. And it's at the same time that we have seen our manufacturing sector decimated. It's the same time we have lost market share, and it's the same time we have seen the middle class hollowed out. I'm not saying that the trade agreements themselves are all to blame, but we have to see that those trends have gone together, and that's troubling to me. Second reason I'm opposed to the TPP and the big trade agreements is just that there's only so much bandwidth, unfortunately, in our United States Congress. I'd much rather see our president putting his time, his energy, his persuasive power, his working of our United States senators and congresspersons I'd much rather see that energy going into passing a real infrastructure bill.
Amen.
Roads, bridges, a smart grid, and communications infrastructure. Let's put our energy there. Let's get that kind of legislation passed. That we know would strengthen America.
There you go. That's a perfect place to start. Katie, I appreciate you taking a little time for us. Please come back and talk to us again as this continues down the road.
Thanks for having me, and all the best to everybody. Be safe in this challenging weather this weekend.
All righty. Thanks so much. KatieMcGinney.com, the website. You can check it out at thericksmithshow.com. Thanks so much. Let's take a quick break. Back with your thoughts. 1-888-520-RICK. 1-888-520-7425. This is The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Take the money and run. Go on, take the money and run. Go on, take the money and run. Go on, take the money and run. Billy Mack is a detective down in Texas. You know he knows just exactly what the facts is. He ain't gonna let those two escape justice. He makes his living off of the people's taxes.
Today, I want to commend China for announcing that it will begin a national market-based cap-and-trade system.
China gets serious about the environment.
Any harm done to the environment is harm to humanity.
Pope Francis calls for a comprehensive UN climate treaty. New report finds the world can move to 100% renewable energy in just 35 years. Plus, Shell pulls the plug on its Arctic drilling adventure.
All of that good news and more straight ahead. From bradblog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
Pope. People lining the route of the motorcade were passing out. And that was just from the fumes from the Volkswagens.
Bless you, Bill Maher. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, have you recovered from the Pope's visit to the U.S.? I know that was a big week for you last week.
Yeah, it was a big deal, but we will get to that next. But first, Shell is giving up its Arctic adventure for now, after sinking 7 years and $7 billion into its Arctic offshore drilling project. Royal Dutch Shell announced on Monday that it will cease further exploration off the shores of Alaska for the, quote, foreseeable future. Shell said that an exploratory well found insufficient quantities of oil and gas to justify the expense of further development. Shell also cited challenging federal regulations as a reason for leaving the Arctic.
Well, was it the federal regulations, or was it the fact that oil prices have plummeted and they just can't find enough oil up there to justify the expense? In any event, glad it's over for now. The pristine Arctic is saved for now. We'll see what next season brings.
Pope Francis, in his speech to the United Nations General Assembly on Friday, declared that the environment itself has rights, and stating that mankind has no authority to abuse or destroy it.
First, it must be stated that a true right of the environment does exist, since the environment itself entails ethical limits, which human activity must acknowledge and respect. Any harm done to the environment is harm to humanity.
Francis also forcefully called on all governments of the United Nations to agree to an ambitious global climate treaty at the final negotiations in Paris in December. And on the same day as the Pope's address, President Obama and Chinese President Xi Jinping announced a new joint vision for that global climate agreement. China will launch a nationwide cap-and-trade program to cut its carbon emissions starting in 2017. Although cap-and-trade mechanisms have succeeded in stopping acid rain and repairing the ozone layer, congressional Republicans rejected similar cap-and-trade legislation in the U.S. back in 2010. At a joint press conference, President Obama said the agreement should be a signal for the rest of the world.
When the world's two largest economies, energy consumers and carbon emitters, come together like this, then there's no reason for other countries, whether developed or developing, to not do so as well. And so this is another major step towards the global agreement the world needs to reach in 2 months' time.
And yet the Republicans in Congress have been for years telling us that China would never do what China has now done.
China, India, all these countries that are still growing, they're not going to stop doing what they're doing.
The experts agree that a climate policy that does not include massive energy consumers like China and India is essentially meaningless.
We can't do it alone as one nation.
The benefit, I think, is difficult to justify when you realize that it's only us doing it. Nobody else is doing this.
I don't think we can control the emissions from China and India, nor do they have any desire to control.
The United States is a country. It's not a planet.
If we have statements such as we do have from the leaders in China, in India, and other countries saying under no circumstances are they going to accept any kind of mandatory reduction, what are we doing here?
Don't those Republicans ever get tired of being wrong?
And major progress has now been made toward those UN climate treaty negotiations. More countries over the weekend presented their specific commitments to cut emissions tailored to each country's circumstances. Now accounts for 2/3 of global emissions, but experts say it is still not enough and further reductions will be necessary. Finally, Greenpeace has released an analysis showing that the world can achieve 100% renewable energy by 2050 and create 20 million jobs. It's based on current rates of growth in renewable energy. 35 years to 100% renewable energy may sound unrealistic, but it turns out that of all of the organizations projecting global energy growth, Greenpeace has by far been the most accurate.
For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to, please check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Download our reports anytime via Stitcher, TuneIn, or iTunes. Find us and follow us on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. From bradblog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
You're bloody well right. You got a bloody right to say. Right. You're bloody well right. You know you got a right to say. You're bloody well right.
Yes, it is all about the children, even after they're born. Rick Smith.
That was a nice surprise, having Katie McGinty call in. Representative Roebuck was supposed to be here, got caught up. I guess they have a hearing, a meeting. It was nice to have Katie McGinty come in at the last minute. Look, you know, I like the fact that there's finally a candidate. There's someone out there talking about trade, talking about jobs. We're going to work on getting John Fetterman on the program, the mayor of Braddock, also another Democratic candidate seeking the nomination there. We've had Joe Sestak on. We've had Katie on. We'll look at getting John Fetterman on as well, because I think this is these primaries are important because you begin to talk about why the issues that aren't really part of the mainstream corporate controlled media, why they're important. I think trade is a huge issue. And, you know, when I did this focus group, that's one of the things that came up because, look, people want things made here. I think that's bipartisan. And there were people saying, we need to get those jobs back. And you do that by having, well, trade policies that benefit us first. And this is where, you know, you listen to the Donald Trumps, you listen to some of the folks who are Bernie Sanders, who are saying, look, we should be building stuff here. We should have trade policies that benefit us first. And Trump's a little bit further out there. Oh, they're all stupid. No, they're not stupid. They know exactly what they're doing. It's just that you and I, we're not the benefactors. We're not supposed to be the ones who are the one going to do well in this. It's pretty much that simple. And I don't know if you heard the good news. Well, for education activists and people who want to defund public education, Arne Duncan has announced he will be stepping down in December. He has been with Obama almost from the beginning, one of those initial appointments that made me go, oh, really? This is going to be a long 4 years. And, you know, Rahm Emanuel, Arnie Duncan, those decisions, the number of the economic advisors he surrounded himself with made me go, uh-oh, probably not good. Now, you look at Arnie Duncan, and Duncan has been one of these high-stake testing people, one of these let's move to privatize, charterize, and move districts into the hands of the profiteers. And what I found coming out of Ohio, that the Youngstown School District, evidently, much like they tried to do here in York, they're trying to push all of this over into the charter zones. And it's coming with a lot of money from people like Arnie Duncan. We're using, and this is where, you start going, well, is the crazy right wing right? Should we be chucking the Department of Education? Because look, what they've done is they've pushed for this whole market-driven, data-driven education system, which is really, honestly, not educating our children. We know how to fill in bubbles. They'll really know how to fill in bubbles. And we used to, as a society, go, I don't know that I necessarily want my kids just filling in bubbles. I would like them to be critical thinkers. And if you look at, and this is what scares me, honestly, this is what really scares me. If you look at where we're going as a country, there aren't going to be an awful lot of jobs for people who can just fill in bubbles. They're going to have to be critical thinkers, and taking us back to where we used to be, where liberal arts educations were a well-rounded education was very important. What we're doing, and it just seems that it's so insane, and you go, why are we doing this? Because it seems to me that we're training kids for, this is going to be your job. This is it. This is where you go. We need to have very narrow hallways where the future is going to be the person who can think and solve problems creatively and not in the box all over the place. And it seems to me that we're really training that kind of alternative thinking out of our kids' minds. And it's scary to me, because the future of education is going to be in the hands of the profiteers if we do nothing about it. Now, the Department of Education approved a $71 million grant for Ohio to move some of this over to these charter schools. And you go, am I missing something here? The numbers are very clear. And I think, I had James Roebuck been available, we would have laid some of this out. The numbers are clear. The charter schools don't do any better than your local public school. They don't. Even the schools that are able to cream off, are able to skim off the cream of the crop, they only do marginally better. So you've got to start asking yourself, okay, where's all this money going? Because we're spending a lot of money on this. We're spending an awful lot of opportunity on this. And we've moved our entire education system. I don't know if you've seen it. And this is why I keep talking about this, because, in conversations that I have with people, everyone thinks it's like the education that we got as kids. I'm 48. My elementary education was a long time ago, but most of my friends think it's the same it's the same. You got a teacher and you go through the whole thing. It's the same. Not the same. The entire focus is not so much even about the grade that you get at the end of the year. Because I can't tell you, when my daughter was struggling a little bit with caring, which, look, if your mind is focused on this test is it, then I can see how you go, I don't really care about my grades. Because every time I would bring it up to the teachers, I would go, well, she's got a B- in math. That's not good. She go, oh, well, don't worry, she'll pass the test. And I'm going, well, if she's going to pass the test, B-? Is that what we're looking for? And, to me, it was, kind of one of those scary times where you go, I'm not liking this. I'm not liking where we're heading. I don't like the direction. And it's this kind of stuff that bothers me. When you see this money being taken from education and put into building really nice buildings for people. You go, well, how's that help education? Well, they have a nice building. Well, we could have done that ourselves. Because we're the ones, after all, who have all the risk. And that's the part that's really kind of frustrating to me. And I guess part of me goes, well, maybe I'm frustrated by it because I'm not the one benefiting from it. Maybe if I could get my hot little hands on all of that money, maybe I'd be all in favor of it. And I think, well, maybe not. Maybe not. Because if you look at the future of this country, and honestly and truthfully, this is what's scary. All of the things that made our country what it was of the 50s, 60s, into the 70s, and even into the 80s, all of that were entrepreneurs who were weird thinkers. They wanted to try something a little different. I look at what we're doing to this kid in Texas, that Ahmed kid. I've read a ton of stories, and now the teachers that he had are coming out and saying, he was a little odd, but look, he's a Sudanese kid who didn't speak a word of English, and he learned to speak English and never stopped. They said he was annoying as all could be because he just chatterbox, excited kid to learn, and was one of these kids who did these things, took all kind of stuff apart, wanted to know everything, was a bright kid. Just a little off. And as the one person put it, he's either going to be, one of the great thinkers and a world-changing CEO, or he's going to be the leader of a criminal enterprise. Take your pick. And we used to go, okay, we'll take that gamble in the hope that he will be the next Bill Gates or Carnegie or whomever who will come up with, or Henry Ford, who will come up with a different idea. Or the guy who, as my friend Phil Hare reminded me, who figured out how to use a sewing machine to put the chips together, the circuit boards, with precision. He used a sewing machine to do that because he was thinking outside the box, doing this mundane job of manufacturing, making clothing, and thinking, wow, how can I use this machine differently? And that's the other part of losing our manufacturing base. Once we lose that, then you lose all of the creativity, you lose a lot of the other stuff that comes with it. And that's scary stuff. Because where's all that at? It's in China right now. They're the ones who are, look, they're where we were back in the 50s. And if you think they're going to give their manufacturing back after, a good decade of trying to steal it, you've got another thing coming. The only thing they understand is power. And this is where you need to have a leader. You need to have someone in the Senate, someone in the White House who's going to stand up and say, not good for us. These trade agreements, not good for us as a nation. I know the multinationals want it. I know the CEO class wants it. But mom and pop can't afford it. Working people in this country can't afford it. We need that kind of champion. The question is, are there any out there? Is Katie McGinty that person? Is she going to be the one to go to the Senate? Hope so. Is John Fetterman going to be the guy? Is Joe Sestak? Because you know who's not? Pat Toomey. And you know who else isn't? The president. And that's frustrating to me, which is why we should be hammering on our representatives, not literally, figuratively, every day, calling their offices and saying, hey, you know what? Bad on the TPP. Don't do it. Don't do it. Simple. Let's take a quick break. Right back.
We're headstrong, back off, I'll take you on. Headstrong to take on anyone. I know that you are wrong if this is not where you belong.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham. UAW President Dennis Williams says what he loves about his union is that the ultimate power of the union is its members, and they make the final decision on contracts. Williams says he'll be meeting with the UAW FCA National Bargaining Committee to discuss the issues at Fiat Chrysler. Williams says he doesn't consider this a setback, but instead considers the membership vote to be part of a process that UAW leadership respects. The tentative Fiat Chrysler deal was rejected by a membership vote this week, largely over a dislike of the two-tier wage system that pays auto workers hired after 2007 less than veteran workers. Economist Richard Wolff says this UAW worker vote is a very significant event.
It's an act of these workers saying no to business as usual with a major car producer. Two big issues were at stake. First, the decision by a majority of workers that they don't like the two-tier system, that they see the injustice of having workers come in, and 40% of Fiat Chrysler are like this, working at $16 to $19 an hour, doing more or less the same as workers getting $28 an hour. It's divisive, it's unjust, and hats off to the workers who made a decision not to go along. And the second issue is equally distrust of the company, that it will once again dance around the contract and move more production to Mexico. These workers don't want business as usual. They don't trust Fiat Chrysler, and it's sort of ironic that earlier this week it was revealed that Fiat Chrysler had also underreported deaths and injuries. So they're not trustworthy by the public, and they're not trustworthy by their own workers, but the workers at least had the courage to do something about it.
East St. Louis teachers went on strike Thursday. Union spokesman Dave Comerford tells Workers Independent News the main issue is a big change in the pay structure that will hurt teachers for their entire careers.
The main sticking point is the district is making a demand that would basically be the equivalent of what we're calling a career pay cut for teachers. They basically want to double the number of years it takes to move through their salary schedule.
Comerford says despite the poverty in East St. Louis, community school district finances are solid, and there's no real economic justification for this salary schedule demand. And he says teacher solidarity and community support for the striking teachers is strong.
There are a number of students out on the picket lines carrying signs. There's parents out there. The number of people honking horns has been incredible. When the police force goes by and they're even kind of sounding their louder horns in support of the teachers.
Coalition of 8 national unions Thursday ratified a labor agreement with the American Red Cross. Wages and benefits were improved in the deal. This is the first national contract covering 4,200 Red Cross workers. The Teamsters represent 1,300 of the workers. AFSCME, AFT, CWA, UAW, UFCW, United Steelworkers, and the SEIU represent the rest of the Red Cross workers. You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
With workers' blood, the mistakes of the bosses we must pay for. From the cities to the farmlands in trenches full of mud. 'Cause war has always been the boss's way, sir. Come on, the union forever defending.
So Reuters is reporting that the employers here in the U.S. are slamming on the brakes. In fact, over the last 2 months, they've pointed out that wages have fallen, the number of jobs expected not there as well. And there's a bunch of reasons they claim for it. I'm of the mindset, very simply, this is John Boehner, this is the Republicans in Congress who have continued this idiotic, nonsensical attack on us. With all of these to the cliff kind of crisis, these 24 type scenarios, the ticking bomb. Are we going to shut the government down over nonsense, or are we going to fund investment in roads and bridges? Are we going to do what for 100, 200 years we've done without blinking an eye? And here to talk a little bit about where our economy is going, why it's going, and all of that, I've asked Matías Vernengo. He is a professor of economics at Bucknell University, also does a great job with the blog Naked Keynesianism. Matías, thanks for taking time for us.
Oh, thank you for having me again, man.
So we see this report, not good. Wages down again, jobs not coming around. We're slamming on the brakes. I'm, like I said, of the mindset, this is our representatives and senators in Washington.
Yes, it's clearly there is a serious problem with the macroeconomic policy at this point, and I think you're right in suggesting that this is it's with Congress that's where this ultimately who ultimately is responsible for this crisis. So we saw last week that the Fed did not increase the interest rate because they were afraid of certainly international markets, but too that the economy wasn't as strong as it seemed, and on that they seem to be correct. So this last report shows very weak growth of employment, and also, as you said, more importantly, because the unemployment rate remains at 5.1, but there are lots of people that are discouraged, not enter the labor force, and that suggests that the risk of inflation is very, very small. And the economy is not growing fast to incorporate all of the people into the labor force. And so we used to be okay, and everybody agreed that under these circumstances, there are certain types of fiscal policy, of fiscal expansion of spending, that it's okay. So there might be differences of whether you're going to spend on, say, healthcare or not. And certainly Republicans, last time they closed the government, it was associated to Obamacare and the expansion of health spending, and fair enough. There might be differences on although differences would imply that they had a plan of how to finance.
Well, they did have a plan, Matías.
But this time around is not even that. You see, so this time around it's just it's a different excuse. But the point. So now it's
it's the same outcome. Yeah, but I would argue they did have a plan for health care. The Republicans absolutely have the pay or die plan. If you can't afford it, you die.
But mind you, this goes. What I didn't say is that it used to be that infrastructure was a common denominator. We all agreed that building bridges and fixing roads was a good thing to do. But that's apparently gone, and that goes to the heart of this. What you just said, that the plan is let people die. This sort of extremism that has taken over the Republican Party. So the politics of taking everybody hostage. So if you don't do exactly, what we want, this case was Planned Parenthood that they threatened with the close of government, which didn't happen by specific circumstances, but may still happen this year. And this would be on top of 2 years. Now we have at least since 2011. Fiscal contraction in place. So all of these shenanigans have done something to the economy. So after the initial fiscal package, that was too small. So it wasn't enough to bring the economy back to full employment or even close to full employment. We have had, that's what people forget, very much like Europe. It's just that the size of our austerity is smaller, but we have had, like Europe, austerity.
Yeah.
And this is all the policies of Congress that have basically blocked any possibility of having an expansion in fiscal policy. And so that seems to be basically in place until the end of the Obama government. But note again on health, how this gives an example. It's not just that their plan is let people die. It's that they have been even willing to close the government on the basis of a plan. Let's be serious about it. Obamacare is a plan that was devised by the Heritage Foundation, and it essentially keeps private sector providers in place and was designed by Republicans.
Yep.
It's Romney Care. So they're willing to vote against a plan that they created and close government and cause all of the suffering because they absolutely cannot play ball. And
let me ask you this. Let me ask you this, because, would you agree then with Republican Representative Charlie Dent, who said that you've got a segment of Congress who can't get to yes? Their ideology, just precludes them from ever coming to the answer, yes, it's never going to be enough. We could never have enough cuts. We could never have enough pain. We can never have enough. It's always going to be gridlock with these folks.
Oh, sure. I think that's exactly what it is. But what I think it's terrible about this story is that people tend to think that this is dysfunctional. It's often described as dysfunctional, and this implies that the system cannot work anymore. But actually, there is a reason for this. There are lots of one would be surprised of how many of these people that have this sort of Tea Party mentality and are in Congress are actually funded by wealthy individuals and foundations, stuff like the Koch brothers and whatnot.
Yep.
And the reason is that it looks dysfunctional and certainly hurts lots of people, but it does play a function. The function is right there when you said at the beginning, the report implies wages are stagnant. And that's what's behind this. It's the same sort of reasons why we sign free trade agreements that clearly hurt local workers. The reason is, it's not like they don't know this is happening. It's exactly because they know it's happening.
Right.
So
and it also
is very, very, it's dysfunctional in a sense because it's not how Congress is supposed to work, but it does provide them with the outcome they want.
Exactly. And this is where I've been saying for a long time, with all of this dysfunction, bring out the mission accomplished banner, because this is what those folks wanted. It fits perfectly with the frame that government can't work and that everything should be in the hands of the privateers.
Yes. And well, the other thing that it's important, I think, to clarify in all of this discussion is that in the media, there is all of this discussion of the size of deficits and how debt is large and all of those things. And there is rarely a discussion of, and analogies with individual families and how if you're a family, you have to balance your budget and you cannot live beyond your means and so on and so forth. And a lot of the Democrats, so if we're going to look at the other side of the aisle, a lot of the Democrats have bought into this kind of argument. And that also has been sort of negative because at the end of the day, what's forgotten in this discussion is that not all deficits and not all debt are equivalent. So spending money is not, depending on how you spend the money, you may have very different outcomes. I often tell my students that it's not the same to get indebted to and hence spend more than you have, so have a deficit, to get an education than spend money to whatever, buy a new car or spend it on booze
take a vacation,
or whatever it is. So there is a difference. Mind you, I'm not saying that you also, because we have another crisis there and something to discuss probably at a different point, the crisis of education and how universities are more expensive and whatnot. But my point is, if you're going to get an education, you're going to get hopefully higher income in the future, better chances at better jobs, and hence the spending is compensated by higher revenues in the future. And the same goes to the government. So the government spending money on infrastructure, for example, or in research and development to get new products and make the economy more competitive and so on and so forth. Those things are not necessarily bad. Those things lead to what? To higher growth in the future, and hence, although you have now more spending, you have far more growth in the future, and hence more revenue to pay for these deficits in the future. So deficits are not necessarily bad. It's the use of the deficits that might be problematic. And that's part of the problem. Now we're spending less and less, but we're not spending on the things we should be spending. We're cutting on the things we should be keeping, on education, on social transfers, on re-education of the labor force. Those are the things that we should be doing that we're not doing.
Yeah. So, during the Bush years, we bought a couple of wars. Probably not the best spending. I would argue we could have probably done a lot better had we just gone in and rebuilt those countries or dropped money from airplanes. That probably would have been better. But, I get your point. The idea in, spending to improve our roads, our bridges, all of that stuff, good spending, blowing stuff up, maybe not so good. But, you keep hearing this, Matea, that we're broke. We don't have any money. We've got $17 trillion in debt. Don't you know that? We're just swimming in debt. We're Greece.
So, but a couple of things on that. So that's true. It's another argument that it's often out there. So, first of all, of those, if you put the debt in terms of GDP, it's about 100%. So the 17, whatever it is, 17, $18 trillion, it's about 100% of GDP. But 40% of that is basically owed by the government to the government itself. So about 20% of that is held by the Federal Reserve, and another 20% or so are in the Social Security Trust Fund. So basically what we're talking is your left hand owes money to your right hand.
Right.
So it's considerably lower than what people think, once you do the right account. So in net effect, it's much smaller.
Yeah, but we
Second
got
of
that
all,
clock in New York, Matías. It keeps ticking for us all the time.
I know, but that's part of the propaganda and the media and the Fox News and all of this sort of stuff that lies to the public. So the second important difference with, say, Greece or Europe is that this is debt in U.S. own currency, so it carries very little risk. Greece needs basically foreign loans in order to get this money. The U.S. doesn't need. And third, and more importantly, the U.S. government can borrow at very low rates. So why wouldn't you borrow money? So at this point, the long-term rate of interest, long-term bonds is around 2%. So it's historically at low levels. It's actually it's close to zero or negative when you think in real terms. So basically, there is no reason not to borrow money, to spend it well, to get the economy growing, to do the things that would lead to growth in the future. So again, it's not any kind of spending. So Keynesianism is not go and spend money whatever you want. It's spend money in ways that would lead to higher employment and higher growth in the future.
Stuff that makes sense. We should have been
very little risk in the U.S. of an actual default, other than the fact that Congress has to approve for the debt ceiling to go up, and they'll have to do that before the end of the year.
Right. And, my friend Bob Ney, a former congressman, said, that used to be a yawn vote because it was money. It's money we've already spent. It's just we're saying we're going to pay for our spending. It used to be a yawn vote, but now it's turned into one of these kind of political footballs that we've got to be right to the cliff, looking over into the abyss of destroying the whole economy and collapsing the government and all of this.
Exactly.
That's
again one of those hostage situations that make little sense. Mind you, on that one, actually the people that fund the Tea Party Congress people tend not to be in favor, because when the actual threat of defaulting comes to the table, they always put pressure on them not to do it. So I would be surprised if they don't eventually, at the last minute, vote to. They may shut down the government, but I think it's harder for them to actually default on that. Yeah. If they do that, because the U.S. has this peculiarity, it's not very common for a nominal limit to the debt in domestic currency. So if the U.S. does that, it would be a unique case of self-inflicted default for no good reason, because the government has perfectly good credit and can continue to be paying, in its domestic currency as long as they want, basically.
So last question I've got for you, as you look at all of this, to the end of the year, it looks like the government is not going to shut down. Do you see the next Christmas present being us moving back, having this, the ticking clock kind of thing as we get into our holiday season?
It's very difficult to know what will happen. This can play very differently, and also remember we're in the middle of an election, so it will be very different, I suppose, who is by the end of the year the leading Republican candidate. If it's more like a Tea Party person, and whether the congressmen sort of fall in line and go according to what a Tea Party candidate sort of suggests, or if you have a Bush that they play the tune and trying to dance with the radical sort of fringe, but at the end of the day they don't want to see government shutdowns or defaults or anything like that. So I think that those could be very different scenarios.
Yeah, they just like the chaos and look, it doesn't look good for the black guy in the White House.
No, not at all. I don't think we're going to have, I'm sorry to say, a very, very slow sort of economy up to the end of his administration.
No, I mean, it's amazing we've done as well as we have. Again, the website, nakedkeynesianism.blogspot.com. We've got a link at thericksmithshow.com. Just click on Matías's name, take you right there. Matías, great talking with you. I appreciate you taking time for us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Great talking with you. Let's take a quick break. Back with your thoughts. 1-888-520-RICK, 1-888-520-7425. This is The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
All of my life I've searched for clarity. I have wrestled with two paths buried deep inside of me. I lost some rounds, been knocked around, felt my share of defeat. Yet somehow I've always managed to get back on my feet.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. Did you enjoy a cup of coffee to start your day this morning? Well, on this day in labor history, the year was 2007. That was the day that Starbucks agreed to post information about union rights on an employee bulletin board at its store in Grand Rapids, Michigan. The International Workers of the World, or Wobblies, were attempting to organize the baristas at that store. The IWW accused Starbucks of interfering with the right to form a union. Starbucks management consistently points to better than average benefits provided for their employees as a reason against unionization. Starbucks management decided to settle the Grand Rapids dispute by letting the union information to go up before the case went through the full Labor Review Board process. This was just one incidence of the IWW's attempt to organize Starbucks workers. The IWW began its outreach efforts at Starbucks in 2004. One of the most pressing issues facing the baristas was scheduling. Like many in the service industry, they are subject to so-called flexible scheduling. Computer software programs create scheduling aimed at reducing labor costs. The result of these programs is often inconsistent and unpredictable hours. This scheduling makes it difficult for workers to establish a budget or plan for childcare. In 2014, the New York Times published a story on this kind of scheduling, featuring the difficulties faced by one Starbucks worker. In a study published also in 2014, they showed that Starbucks stores had 14% less employees on average in 2011 through 13 than they did in 2005 through 2007. Starbucks is not alone in using computer scheduling. Efforts to cut labor costs continue to have devastating impact on the day-to-day lives of workers in the service economy. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Tales of American Political History with Clinton Porter Hackney.
We've been discussing the change from budget gamesmanship creating government showdowns to shutting it down for political gain. The 16 U.S. government shutdowns prior to 1995 were caused by different factions standing their ground on the way to solving budget problems. However, the Newt Gingrich-led congressional standoff against Clinton was orchestrated to increase support for Republicans and disdain for Clinton and the Democrats, which caused a damaging 21-day shutdown. It was 18 years before anyone tried it again, but it played out just the same. In place of Gingrich was Senator Ted Cruz. In place of the purpose of helping Republicans was the purpose of helping Ted Cruz. And in place of the 1995 damages were 800,000 furloughs, the closing of parks, and the loss of funding for health and nutrition programs. And now it's Groundhog Day all over again. This is Clinton Porter Hackney at cphackney.com.
Chances are, when you took a shower this morning, an AFSCME member made sure that water was clean. When you drove to work, an AFSCME member maintained the road. When you rode an elevator, an AFSCME member inspected it. I'm David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. AFSCME members enforce regulations, keep prisoners behind bars, take care of patients, protect the environment, and more. The work isn't glamorous, the salaries aren't high, but AFSCME members serve the public in every aspect of our daily lives. Chances are, you'll never see that AFSCME member working in a sewage plant, diving underwater to repair a bridge, or answering a 911 call. But aren't you glad they do? For more information, visit AFSCME13.org. We are AFSCME.
We make Pennsylvania happen!
Minimum wage!
Yeah! You know what it means when they pay you minimum wage? You know what they're trying to tell you is like, hey, if I could pay you less, I would.
So next Wednesday, October 7th, 4 p.m. at Lisa Baker's office, Senator Lisa Baker, evidently the good senator, the one who seems to be holding up the minimum wage from hitting the floor for a vote. She's the committee chairperson for the Republicans, the leadership, if you will. But they're having a minimum wage vigil held across the street from her office there at 22 Dallas Village Shopping Center in Dallas, PA. And I would have to think from across the state, what we want to be doing is calling her office and saying, you know what, we're standing in solidarity with those folks who are holding the candles out in front of your office, because it's about damn time we raise the minimum wage. And we shouldn't have to have these fights every several years. One of the things that's frustrating to me is, I remember in 2006, when we were fighting here in PA to raise it to $7.15. And I remember saying at the time, we need to index this so we don't have to keep doing this. We don't have to go 5, 6, 7, 8, or in this case, 9 years before passing a piece of legislation that would increase the minimum wage. It should be part of just done. There should be an automatic adjuster in there to where as inflation goes up, the wages go up. Or like they did in 2009, they went down. When inflation went down, wages went down. I can see that automatic adjuster. Now, I'm not thrilled with the down part, but Colorado did it. It's something that they do. I'm of the mindset, why do we have to keep having these fights? Why? Well, because we know why. Because the corporate class knows that they can hold off and hold off and hold off, and then at the last minute come up with something paltry like Senator Scott Wagner's $8.75 over the next 3 years. They know they can come up with something that will just be eaten away, and it will be no real increase. In fact, I would argue $8.75 would actually be still falling behind. Not as far behind as if you did nothing, but still falling behind. Frustrating, angry. Good news out of South Carolina, though. Evidently, according to the Greenville News, they reported on Saturday that companies in South Carolina are now going to have to pay the minimum wage to all of their inmate labor. 3 companies had been using South Carolina inmate labor, according to the Associated Press, and paying them below the $2 an hour now that the inmates get as a minimum wage. $2 an hour. Stop and think about that for a second. They said that prisoners were doing such things as making license plates, refurbishing golf carts, and recycling textiles. They had not been considered manufacturing workers and did not fall under the federal minimum wage laws. The newspaper reported of the 315 workers employed in such programs, they were being paid between 35 cents an hour and $1.80 an hour. Again, as I've been saying, what we're doing is we're locking up poor people. We're putting them to work. And who's making a ton of money? Well, the rich people. Perfect, smart entrepreneurs. Unless you're one of the folks who happens to be on the poor end of the spectrum. When I look at this, and especially South Carolina, who has a history of convict lease minors and all of these convict lease programs of the past, where we locked up poor black people and put them to work doing dangerous jobs for no wages just to get out of jail, kind of reminds me of the exact same thing. We're taking poor people, we're locking them up for trivial things and setting high bond, and we're giving them high fees and fines that they know they can't pay, so you got to go to jail, work it off. What a great low-wage scheme. Unless you're one of the low-wage workers. I wonder if we ever stop doing this. I wonder if we ever get so outraged that we eventually say no more. Just kind of wondering. Let's take a quick break. Right back. When we come back and talk a little bit about the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership Free Trade Agreement. Also, Joe Biden. Can Joe Biden jump into the race now? A lot of questions if he will, but especially can he jump in now after his support of the TPP? We'll find out with Dave Johnson, Campaign for America's Future. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
I got no time for living, yes, I'm working all the time. It seems to me I could live my life a lot better than I think I am. I guess that's why they call me They call me the working man.
Making the blue blood see red. The Rick Smith Show.
Today, I want to commend China for announcing that it will begin a national market-based cap and trade system.
China gets serious about the environment.
Any harm done to the environment is harm to humanity.
Pope Francis calls for a comprehensive UN climate treaty. New report finds the world can move to 100% renewable energy in just 35 years. Plus, Shell pulls the plug on its Arctic drilling adventure.
All of that good news and more straight ahead from bradblog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
Pope. People lining the route of the motorcade were passing out. And that was just from the fumes from the Volkswagens.
Bless you, Bill Maher. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, have you recovered from the Pope's visit to the U.S.? I know that was a big week for you last week.
Yeah, it was a big deal, but we will get to that next. But first, Shell is giving up its Arctic adventure for now after sinking 7 years and $7 billion into its Arctic offshore drilling project. Royal Dutch Shell announced on Monday that it will cease further exploration off the shores of Alaska for the, quote, foreseeable future. Shell said that an exploratory well found insufficient quantities of oil and gas to justify the expense of further development. Shell also cited challenging federal regulations as a reason for leaving the Arctic.
Well, was it the federal regulations or was it the fact that oil prices have plummeted and they just can't find enough oil up there to justify the expense? In any event, glad it's over for now. The pristine Arctic is saved for now. We'll see what next season brings.
Pope Francis, in his speech to the United Nations General Assembly on Friday, declared that the environment itself has rights and stating that mankind has no authority to abuse or destroy it.
First, it must be stated that a true right of the environment does exist, since the environment itself entails ethical limits, which human activity must acknowledge and respect. Any harm done to the environment is harm to humanity.
Francis also forcefully called on all governments of the United Nations to agree to an ambitious global climate treaty at the final negotiations in Paris in December. And on the same day as the Pope's address, President Obama and Chinese President Xi Jinping announced a new joint vision for that global climate agreement. China will launch a nationwide cap-and-trade program to cut its carbon emissions starting in 2017. Although cap-and-trade mechanisms have succeeded in stopping acid rain and repairing the ozone layer, congressional Republicans rejected similar cap-and-trade legislation in the U.S. back in 2010. At a joint press conference, President Obama said the agreement should be a signal for the rest of the world.
When the world's two largest economies, energy consumers and carbon emitters, come together like this, then there's no reason for other countries, whether developed or developing, to not do so as well. And so this is another major step towards the global agreement the world needs to reach in 2 months' time.
And yet the Republicans in Congress have been for years telling us that China would never do what China has now done.
China and India, all these countries that are still growing, and they're not going to stop doing what they're doing.
The experts agree that a climate policy that does not include massive energy consumers like China and India is essentially meaningless.
We can't do it alone as one nation.
The benefit, I think, is difficult to justify when you realize that it's only us doing it. Nobody else is doing this.
I don't think we can control the emissions from China and India, nor do they have any desire to control.
The United States is a country. It's not a planet.
If we have statements such as we do have from the leaders in China, in India, and other countries saying under no circumstances are they going to accept any kind of mandatory reduction, what are we doing here?
Don't those Republicans ever get tired of being wrong?
And major progress has now been made toward those UN climate treaty negotiations. More countries over the weekend presented their specific commitments to cut emissions tailored to each country's circumstances. Now accounts for 2/3 of global emissions, but experts say it is still not enough and further reductions will be necessary. Finally, Greenpeace has released an analysis showing that the world can achieve 100% renewable energy by 2050 and create 20 million jobs. It's based on current rates of growth in renewable energy. 35 years to 100% renewable energy may sound unrealistic, but it turns out that of all of the organizations projecting global energy growth, Greenpeace has by far been the most accurate.
For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to, please check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Download our reports anytime via Stitcher, TuneIn, or iTunes. Find us and follow us on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. From bradblog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
You're bloody well right. You got a bloody right to say. Right. You're bloody well right. You know you got a right to say. You're bloody well right.
Your working class radio experience, where hard work, common sense, and rational thoughts are a reality. The Rick Smith Show.
Working hard to make a left. Red shed a bomb red. The father son left to carry on. Blue denim had his vein. Oh, he's a working class man.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Today, Manufacturing Day. So happy Manufacturing Day to everyone. Go out today and buy an American-made product. Something, $64 is all you got to spend this year. We could create 200,000 new jobs. Could be the job that you get someday. Seems to me to be the right thing, the step in the right direction. I'll tell you what is not a step in the right direction. More bad free trade agreements. And here to talk about the latest monstrosity, the TPP. I've asked Dave Johnson from the Campaign for America's Future, ourfuture.org, to come talk to us about the TPP. Dave, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, thanks for having me on. You always have the best music in the lead up, I got to say.
I try. I try my hardest. Not good stuff with what I'm reading here about the TPP right now, but I got to be honest. There's part of me that thinks with John Boehner going, maybe I hope it's not going to work.
Maybe, yeah. Well, first of all, Manufacturing Day, the unemployment or the employment jobs report today, manufacturing lost 9,000 jobs. So
on top of the 19 they lost last month.
Yeah. So the Trans-Pacific Partnership, I know I always come on and talk about this stuff in Fast Track, but guess what? It's back in Atlanta right now. The ministers and others who negotiate this are down there trying to wrap it up. They were going to try to get it wrapped up for Thursday. They've extended it to Friday. Now they've extended it to Saturday. But there's a possibility that they come out of this weekend ready to sign TPP. So it's coming, still coming. It hasn't gone away. It didn't disappear. Everybody's been quiet, but there it is. Yeah, with John Boehner out of the picture, I don't know that it'll get better or worse. We'll see. I mean, it depends on how much Wall Street supervision they have over the new leader, or, maybe, God, I hate to say this, maybe the good news will be, oh, God, this is hard to say, but maybe the good news will be that Trump will have some influence over the new leader, because Trump's against it. That's hard to say.
As I think sane, rational people should be at this point. I mean, we've seen what these trade agreements have been about. Right. Trump runs around, and since you threw his name out there, he runs around saying, these negotiators are stupid. They don't know what they're doing. And I disagree. Yeah. I think they know exactly what they're doing.
Exactly.
It's just that we don't matter.
Don't say sane, rational people and Donald Trump in the same hour, in the same day. Don't even say them on the same day. Anyway, but there's a good thing. Donald Trump, one of the things, he knows darn well how to appeal to people. And one of the ways you appeal to people is to talk about these trade agreements because people get it. You bet. Okay, so down in Atlanta, they're wrapping it up, maybe. The big issues, here's the big issue, still is auto parts and auto manufacturing. Under NAFTA, the deal was that U.S., Mexico, and Canada would have an open largely tariff-free exchange of automobile stuff. That's why all the automobile companies moved down to Mexico so fast.
Yeah.
But
so we've renegotiated.
Mexico,
evidently, we renegotiated NAFTA, like the president said we were going to do when he was running under the campaign. Only he made it worse.
Much worse. Right now, to get that tariff-free, they have to be 60-some% country of origin of NAFTA. In other words, the parts and manufacturing have to be in the 60% done in Mexico, U.S., or Canada. And Japan comes in, wants to be in TPP, and they want it knocked way down. The numbers are just ridiculous. I think 15, 30, so I don't know. Some I forget right now, but low numbers. And the reason they want low numbers, in other words, if of all the countries in the Trans-Pacific Partnership, you have the tariff gone if the content of the car is made among those countries. That percent of it, okay, and auto parts. Japan wants to bring in manufactured cars and auto parts from China and then sell them here. From China. All right. So the whole point of this agreement, where they agree amongst these countries that we're going to do this, and okay, so if we build it in the country, we get rid of the tariffs, and Japan is trying to get it made in China. And the U.S., in order to try to get Japan into this thing, is trying to say, okay, we'll do it that way. And they went around Mexico and Canada to make a deal with Japan to try to get Japan into the TPP.
Wow.
And essentially, the U.S. was arguing against American, Canadian, and Mexican workers to get stuff made in China brought in, okay?
Okay, so what do they get then? I mean, okay,
so
we're going
to... They're renegotiating NAFTA and making it vastly worse than even NAFTA was.
We're screwing workers in all three countries. Who benefits then? I mean, if we're playing with the frame that they're not incompetent and they're not stupid, what do they get in return? What are we getting out of Japan?
They get Japan coming in and maybe agreeing to finally get this thing done. It's not about the auto parts at all. It's about the other stuff in TPP that they want to get these countries in to get done. And the big one that I could see, and that everybody looks at this that has read the leaks. Don't forget, this is all secret. We don't get to know what this whole thing's going to be, but some of it's leaked. And the big one is this clause that lets corporations sue governments. Right now, the way it is that you and I, if we're harmed by a corporation, we can go to court. If we have a government and we say we want environmental laws and we want this and that, we can make corporations stop polluting and stuff, okay? So we can go and sue corporations to make them stop. And the clause in this trade agreement turns that around. It says that governments can't tell companies what to do anymore if it limits their profit. We can't tell them not to pollute. We can't tell them all these things. And here's an example. We can't even, right now under similar clauses, tobacco companies are suing governments that try to prevent kids from smoking. They're suing governments to try to help citizens stop smoking because that interferes with corporate profits. And that is in TPP. That's one of the actual big issues being discussed in Atlanta this weekend because it is so egregious that it's waking people up. People are saying, wait a minute, there's something in TPP that's so bad that tobacco companies can sue governments if they try to help kids not smoke, and there it is. It's in there. So they're trying to so that the public doesn't catch on. They're trying to get that one thing out of it. I mean, the tobacco companies, not the thing that lets corporations sue governments, but they don't want the tobacco thing is so bad that it makes people realize what's going on.
Yeah,
so
you could probably look at 1,000 other things. You go back to the Charlie Safe tuna. You go back to Mexico suing us for not allowing them to dump hazardous chemicals. All of this stuff. I mean, just bad from top to bottom.
It reverses the position of corporations trying to keep of governments trying to keep corporations under control, trying to keep them from polluting, trying to keep them from shipping products that harm us. To the other way around, where corporations can go after governments because that costs them money.
Now, let me ask
And
you
they're-
this.
They're going to turn this into a law that we have to live by.
Right. Let me ask you this, because, I've been saying for years, the mantra on the right, the corporate mantra is government bad, public bad, private good. And this just takes that to the next level. We can't trust government. We can't trust the people. Only the profiteers should be running things. And this is it. This is saying, look, we corporations know better than you lawmakers and you people. We'll take care of you. But at the end of it, we're in charge.
Here's a way to look at it. Trans-Pacific Partnership is largely being negotiated between these big companies. The people that we have doing the negotiation, the head of it came out of Citibank, and Citibank gave him this bonus of, millions and millions of dollars when he left to join the government. The other people are all either from corporations or, of course, helping to go into corporations for multi-million-dollar jobs. So you can consider them corporate representatives. Same deal with the other negotiators from other countries. Okay, so if you had corporations negotiating an agreement for how business ought to be done, what do you think they'd come up with? Of course they'd come up with something that says that we're going to get government so they can't get in our way anymore. Of course they would, and here we are.
So who's our savior in this? You got Trump out there screaming against it. You got Bernie Sanders out there against it. Hillary's kind of wishy-washy. There's talk maybe Joe Biden jumps into the middle. Who's the savior?
Joe Biden's pushing this. Don't. Joe Biden, he's a great guy and everything, but Joe Biden is pushing this hard. Joe Biden had a meeting with Japan's Prime Minister Abe this week to try to get him to sign on. Joe Biden's pushing this. So here's a question. If Joe Biden's going to jump into this race, what happens when people figure out that Joe Biden's been pushing Trans-Pacific Partnership? And from that, we go to Hillary Clinton, who hasn't yet said what she thinks about it. Now, people hate this. Anybody that knows about the Trans-Pacific Partnership hates it. And Democrats hate it. Look who's lined up on this. On the one side, you've got the big corporations, you've got Wall Street, you've got Republicans working with Obama, you've got the Chamber of Commerce, lobbyists. That's one side. On the other side, you got almost every Democrat. There's a few that you just know they're going to leave and become lobbyists that are for it. You've got every labor union. You've got every identifiable progressive group. You've got all of these kinds of things, LGBT groups. You got anti-slavery groups because of the whole thing with Malaysia and slavery and the TPP. So Joe Biden has picked the other side of that against what you would call the Democratic base, or the kind of people who vote in primaries. Hillary Clinton better line up quick on the right side of that.
Let me ask you this then, Dave, because I've had people tell me that that the moneyed interests see Hillary falling. They see the 1,000 paper cuts, the Benghazi, the email, all of this stuff going to take her down. The moneyed interests don't want any part of Bernie, so they're going to bring in Joe Biden to kind of save the day, but still the same bad policies that the neoliberals want out of someone like Hillary.
Well, that's what's going on in the background of the people, the elite who kind of say this kind of stuff. But it isn't going to matter, because what's going to matter is the Democratic primaries. It looks to a lot of people why we haven't had any Democratic debates yet, by the way. Mm-hmm. You remember 2007? We had, 12, 13 debates already by now. I mean, the whole summer of 2007 was debates. I remember being at one at Roots Nation myself. And yet we haven't even had a single debate yet. And then the debate schedule that's coming up is like some of them are on holidays. One of them is just before the Christmas break. So there are times when people aren't going to even be watching anyway. It's almost like they're trying to keep Bernie Sanders from being heard.
It's almost like.
Well, yeah, almost.
No, it's absolutely like. But the reality is, anybody who knows how this game is played realizes it's about the delegates. I mean, Bernie can win a bunch of the early primaries. It's still going to be about the delegates who, as I understand, and some of the folks that I know are saying Hillary's got a good number of them wrapped up.
Well, it isn't going to matter if Bernie's winning primary after primary. you just can't force it through that much that somebody comes in winning all the primaries and somebody else, gets the nomination. How obvious would that be? But there's another thing that just came out. I think Media Matters did a look at the network news coverage of Bernie. How much has anybody been hearing Donald Trump? In the whole Republican
he sucked
thing?
all the oxygen out of the room.
Well,
because
maybe,
everyone loves the
but at the
circus,
same
man.
time-
Everyone loves the circus.
Remember when? Who was it? They were talking about someone might enter the race. Oh, I forgot now. But they said when they were talking about maybe Mitt Romney might jump into the race.
Right.
That got more coverage on the network news broadcast than Bernie Sanders has to date.
You're right. And it's because the powers to be, the wealth class of this country doesn't want the working class to wake up and realize that they've been getting screwed for the last 40 years and their unions have been destroyed. Their wealth has been stolen from them. Their standard of living is dwindling and the middle class is collapsing. They don't want people to think that way. They want to go, oh, it's tough times. We're broke. We don't have money. We need to tighten the belt and sacrifice.
Right.
That's the message they want in our ear.
Hey, speaking of stealing all the public wealth, not to ring a different bell, but there's stuff going on with the post office now.
No, let's steal that.
So there's a lot of talk again behind the scenes about privatizing the post office.
Not
It's
surprised.
bubbling up again.
As I've been saying,
Bubbling
this is a huge real estate ripoff. You know how much property the Postal Service owns? This is an enormous real estate grab. This is an enormous wealth grab. And I can't tell you, I've had conversations over the last several months. Nobody knows it's going on other than listeners to this program.
The postal is not just an enormous real estate grab. It's a national infrastructure of managed and connected buildings, truck lines, everything else. I mean, imagine if you were UPS and you had what the post office has.
Yeah.
Imagine if you were a telecom and you had what the post office has. Anyway, so the post office, first of all, they're supposed to make money. Well, how many government services make money? A government service is supposed to provide service, not make money off the public, but provide service.
Correct.
The military budget doesn't make money, that's for sure. Okay, so they required them to make money, but they're not allowed to use that massive, impressive infrastructure they had to do things that would compete with private businesses. Here's the best example of all. Public banking.
I'm with you.
A huge number of Americans don't have bank accounts. Banks won't give it to them. They don't have enough money, so they have to go to payday lenders to cash checks, check cashing services, to get little loans of $50. They're going to owe the payday lender $100 later. All of these things, they can't pay their bills. They have to pay for bill paying services and stuff. If the post office offered bank accounts to every citizen, no matter what, all of these people would be served by people that the banks won't serve. And the post office has buildings they could put ATMs out front of in every city in the country.
Exactly.
So postal banking, what if, not only that, but what if then the Congress appropriated some money and you could put your IRA or your retirement savings of any kind at a postal bank and get 5% interest?
But Dave,
that'd be nice.
But Dave,
guaranteed.
We're told the public sector can do nothing. The post office can't even deliver a piece of mail, Dave. Haven't you heard?
Right. And by the way, they're cutting back on the postal processing centers. They're cutting back on Saturday delivery in order to make it look like the post office doesn't do a good job. So imagine if they could do public banking, but not just that. What if they, through the post office, could provide really super fast internet service to everybody?
Wow, there's one I'd like, because where I live in a barren wasteland of internet.
At low price.
Wow, things we could do for ourselves. Imagine that.
Yeah, we could. Yeah, that's right. Things we could do for ourselves. We, the people, through our post office, could have these things. So instead, they're trying to privatize the post office, trying to say it's bad. And the president right now is appointing new board members. He has to be bipartisan So it's on the Republican side, though, he's appointing a major privatizer. But on the Democrat side, he's appointing someone who's against public banking because he comes out of Wall Street.
Jeez.
So a lot's going on behind the scenes with our post office, and it's just one more example of these things going on where they rig the system so that a few people can make a ton of money and the rest of us are out. One more time. But the wealth that we own through our post office, you know, it's real estate, but it's also infrastructure.
They want it.
Done.
They want it. It's just amazing, and it's something that we've got to be paying attention to. And I'm sure when you come back, we'll talk more about this as it continues. The hope is that we start educating, enraging, and activating folks into pushing back against all the privatization schemes and, of course, these horrible free trade agreements. Dave, I appreciate you taking time for us, man.
Hey, we got one more second?
Go ahead.
Privatization, if they do privatize, what that always means that people are getting good wages working for the government or the post office, they're laid off, homes foreclosed, all the problems of that, they go on public assistance, and the people that are rehired get near minimum wage. That's another thing about privatization. Okay, that was a few seconds.
There you go. Desperation class living. Thanks, Dave. Appreciate it. Let's take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
We gotta take the bastards down.
Would you dive 14 feet deep in the Susquehanna to keep a bridge safe? Would you spend night after night with prisoners to keep your community safe? Would you spend Christmas Eve plowing snow to keep roads safe? AFSCME members do. Men and women who choose to serve in public service. Mine inspectors, 911 dispatchers, healthcare workers, parole agents. You may not think about them, but no, they're all thinking about you. This message brought to you by AFSCME Council 13.
Exposing that free trade is never free. The Rick Smith Show.
Talk about the U.S. inflation. I understand just a little. No comprende, it's a riddle.
Think about that for a second. The lowering the amount of domestic content in an automobile down to 15%. Imagine what that would do to U.S. manufacturing in this country. Imagine what it would do to the auto industry. Not just the big three, not just the American companies, but all of the Japanese, the German, the other companies. Because it would go, well, you know, everyone's got to go to Mexico. Everybody pack up, let's go. So think about all of the billions of dollars that we've given in choosing foreign producers of cars. This is what Republicans have brought us. Their disdain for working people is so great that we took billions of taxpayer dollars, subsidized these foreign car makers, and have really pushed them on us. All the while penalizing the American manufacturers. And then forcing them through these really insane trade deals, not forcing them, yes, but at their want, then to move to places like China. To move their manufacturing first, thanks to NAFTA, to Mexico, and then out of this country. And we as consumers, which is why I think it's important to pay attention to a day like today, Manufacturing Day, that you consider where you're buying your stuff. Is it made in the U.S.? Is it made by your neighbors? You know, I went to this, and I've talked about it a couple of times, this focus group. And I walked in with my baseball bat, because a little stunty thing. A Pennsylvania-made bat, American-made, union-made baseball bat. A listener sent it to me, and thank you, Mickey. I love that bat. And I said, you know, all you can do is this fantastic, well-crafted product right here. This is what we should be buying. American-made products. But you go and you look at what's being sold in the stores, all Chinese-made. And not cheap either. That's the other part of this. We were told, we get cheap stuff from overseas. I don't know if you've noticed. Not cheap. Not cheap at all. Anyway, if you missed any of today's program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you go to get the podcast. The Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. Android, Apple, whatever, all right there. Just go to the store and look up The Rick Smith Show. You can download it right onto your phone for free. And as always, you can email me, Rick, at thericksmithshow.com. I do answer all emails personally. Appreciate the interest, the thoughts, the questions, the comments, all of that. Going to take a quick break. When we come back, going to talk a little bit about what's going on in Harrisburg. The GOP stunt, where did it go? Also, what is it about the nationalists? What is it about white nationalists that the Republicans are thrilled with?
Exposing that free trade is never free. The Rick Smith Show.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham. UAW President Dennis Williams says what he loves about his union is that the ultimate power of the union is its members, and they make the final decision on contracts. Williams says he will be meeting with the UAW FCA National Bargaining Committee to discuss the issues at Fiat Chrysler. Williams says he doesn't consider this a setback, but instead considers the membership vote to be part of a process that UAW leadership respects. The tentative Fiat Chrysler deal was rejected by a membership vote this week, largely over a dislike of the two-tier wage system that pays auto workers hired after 2007 less than veteran workers. Economist Richard Wolff says this UAW worker vote is a very significant event.
It's an act of these workers saying no to business as usual with a major car producer. Two big issues were at stake. First, the decision by a majority of workers that they don't like the two-tier system, that they see the injustice of having workers come in, and 40% of Fiat Chrysler are like this, working at $16 to $19 an hour, doing more or less the same as workers getting $28 an hour. It's divisive, it's unjust, and hats off to the workers who made a decision not to go along. And the second issue is equally distrust of the company, that it will once again dance around the contract and move more production to Mexico. These workers don't want business as usual. They don't trust Fiat Chrysler, and it's sort of ironic that earlier this week it was revealed that Fiat Chrysler had also underreported deaths and injuries. So they're not trustworthy by the public, and they're not trustworthy by their own workers, but the workers at least had the courage to do something about it.
East St. Louis teachers went on strike Thursday. Union spokesman Dave Comerford tells Workers Independent News the main issue is a big change in the pay structure that will hurt teachers for their entire careers.
The main sticking point is the district is making a demand that would basically be the equivalent of what we're calling a career pay cut for teachers. They basically want to double the number of years it takes to move through their salary schedule.
Comerford says despite the poverty in East St. Louis, community school district finances are solid, and there's no real economic justification for this salary schedule demand. And he says teacher solidarity and community support for the striking teachers is strong.
There are a number of students out on the picket lines carrying signs. There's parents out there. The number of people honking horns has been incredible. When the police force goes by and they're even kind of sounding their louder horns in support of the teachers.
Coalition of 8 national unions Thursday ratified a labor agreement with the American Red Cross. Wages and benefits were improved in the deal. This is the first national contract covering 4,200 Red Cross workers. The Teamsters represent 1,300 of the workers. AFSCME, AFT, CWA, UAW, UFCW, United Steelworkers, and the SEIU represent the rest of the Red Cross workers. You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
He's going the distance. He's going for speed. She's all alone, all alone in a car.
So the big news, the Republicans passed a stunt kind of sham of a budget. One of those temporary stopgap things like we see in D.C., and the governor said we're going to have none of that. You're going to come to work, you're going to sit down, and we're going to hammer this out. And I think the governor's got the high ground here, especially when he came out and said, look, I've been to work every day. I come in, I punch the clock, I'm here. I'm seated at the table, ready to do some horse trade and some bargaining. Where have you been? And the truth is, they've been on vacation. And that's one of those things that I think a lot of my friends, anyway, angry about. I understand if you're not getting things done but you're working at it. But to just go vacation kind of makes you wonder, which is why we've asked our good friend John Neurohr, Communications Director for Keystone Progress, to come talk with us. John, thanks for taking time for us.
It's always great to be with you, Rick.
So here we are. It looks like, there's no budget in sight. Here we are, I think, where everybody said we would be, a couple of months overdue, and, well, gimmickry, gamery, Washington-style politic. Here it is.
Yeah, this notion that there's going to be this vote on Wednesday, that they split up the basically the revenue producing components of the governor's budget proposal. They split that out. They're going to vote on that. And for the Democrats and for the governor, it's an uphill battle. I mean, the numbers obviously make this really difficult, where you have to get 20 Republicans in the House, and I think it's 7. Then it would be 7 Republicans in the Senate to vote for this. It's what's frustrating though is that what those producing components of the governor's budget represent is our ability as a state to effectively budget and function and not continue to have our credit downgraded, which it has been 5 times in the last 3 years by credit rating agencies, because we aren't we aren't collecting enough revenue to pay for even the minimums. And frankly, and we've talked about this many times, there is not enough funding in the first place for public education and social services.
Right.
That's why we have a Tom Wolf instead of a Tom Corbett, frankly. And we weren't even able to pass budgets that collected enough revenue to efficiently balance those budgets that weren't paying out enough to public education and social services in the first place. So if you are a staunch fiscal conservative and you're the kind of elected official that goes around on the stump and talks about how we should have a balanced budget amendment and things like that, if that's who you really are, and it's not all a song and dance, then you should step up to the plate and say, yeah, we need to have a balanced budget, which means we need to have the revenue to be able to pay out what we need to pay out and not be downgraded by these credit rating agencies. It's a total sham.
It is a total sham. But you know what? I did this, and I've been talking about this all week. I did this focus group on Monday where I presented the labor perspective, if you will, in what was a kind of a sham. I mean, the whole thing was to get to a position where they can say, we polled these people and we went to this focus group and they all want to break unions and they all hate workers and they all want the governor to pass what the Republicans want in the budget. And what the frame that they used on Monday is, did you know that the Republicans and the Democrats, the Republicans, all of them, and all of the Democrats, they agree on about 70% of the budget. So we should just do that. And the other stuff, well, we can fight over forever. And, the reasonable people in the room are going, sounds rational. That's what we should do. And I'm going, no, that's not what we should do, because the other stuff then never gets done. Like taking care of children, like helping the poor, like helping seniors. That stuff gets, left out.
Well, the other problem there is that a huge part of that 30% that there is an agreement on is actually paying for the other 70%. No, that's the problem here. And you can't have your cake and eat it too. That's not how budgeting works. So I understand the unfortunate realities of when you get people in a room like that and you get groupthink and everybody, and people decide they want to cut welfare benefits. Or people decide that they want to cut other social services or whatever. Everybody wants their taxes reduced, but that's not the world that we live in. That's not reality. And most of the elected officials that we're talking about in Harrisburg understand that. Now, whether or not they do the right thing, that's a whole other question. But most of them at least understand that reality.
Here's the thing that gets me, though. I mean, I think most of us live in a reality-based world where when you lay it out, you say, look, we want to educate our kids. We want to have all of these services. We want this stuff. We've decided this over the years. Now you just have to pay for it. It's a matter of being big boys and big girls and saying, okay, we've gotten away from paying our fair share into this, and especially big corporations and the very wealthy. maybe we have an adult conversation about, how do we fund all of the things that we want in our society, which I don't think is happening right now.
No, not at all. I think that's absolutely right. And the other problem is when it comes down to it, and we saw this when we had $1 billion cut from public education over the last 4 years. When it really hits home.
No, not over the last 4 years, each of the last 4 years.
Okay, yeah, I'm sorry, I said that incorrectly. So what we're talking about is when this really hits home and you start to see a situation where, well, now your kids don't have the textbooks they need, or now your kids are in a classroom with 35 kids. Then people say, well, wait, whoa. You can't keep doing these cuts to public education. But then you have to have that difficult conversation about where that funding comes from, and people don't want to have that.
Yeah, and look, at the end of it, do I like paying taxes? No, but I do like having my roads plowed, and I do like my kids having a school that has programs that are going to help them in their lives, and not just saddling them into 100 into a class, which I have an enormous problem with. I'm willing to pay a little bit more, and I think as a society, if you were to lay that out in a big boy fashion, big girl fashion, I think people overwhelmingly go, yeah, that makes sense.
And I think here's another thing that people understand, or people should understand, is that if they're unable to pass the revenue increases on Wednesday, and you go back and you look at what the Republicans have already passed thus far, and look at that as a framework for our budget moving forward. In 2016, 2017, if that's the framework for a budget moving forward, then our state structural deficit goes to over $3 billion because the Republicans are unable and unwilling to have a real conversation about the revenue side of the balance sheet. Over $3 billion. I mean that, and think about what would have to be done by this time next year, or by summer of next year, to be able to not have our credit downgraded, to be able to pay our bills, frankly, to not have to lay off massive amounts of workers. What would happen is, another $1 billion in cuts to things like public education or the Department of Human Services. And, the consequences to that, after we've already cut for the last 4 years, it would be unbelievable. It is scary to think about.
And maybe it's what we need, though. I mean, honestly, there's a part of me that goes, John, there's a part of me that goes, maybe sometimes people need to smack upside the back of the head to go, oh, yeah, that's right. Now I get it. Let's undo all the bad stuff.
I understand the sentiment. At the same time, wouldn't you call that what happened over the last 4 years when we talk about public education? People were smacked in the back of the head. And like I said, that's why we have Tom Wolf and not Tom Corbett as governor. I think that's, reason number one. So,
but do you think it's
the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result?
Right. But do you think that's happened to enough people yet? I mean, a lot of the really draconian cuts, when you look at what Corbett and the Republicans did, kicking 41,000 low-wage workers off of adult basic, almost 90,000 kids off a chip, all of the education cuts, they were mostly targeted at poor people who don't have the kind of political clout or power to really be able to fight back. I don't think it's really hit the middle class of the country as hard as what we're going to see would.
I think that's a very good point. I think that's well put. I think it's absolutely true. I just hope that it doesn't get to that.
Well, you and me both.
I would never advocate anything like that. And hopefully, you have elected officials that have the guts to step up and do what, like I said, they understand is the right thing.
Right. But what they're going to do, John, is they're just going to try and change the subject, which we saw, over the last several weeks with this nonsensical English only nonsense and the Daryl Metcalf hearing where, the woman wants to ask a question. He's like, no, you can't. No, shut up. And I'm going, wait a second. Where are we?
I want to personally apologize at the onset of this conversation for Daryl Metcalf. I'm sitting here in southern Butler County in Daryl Metcalf's district, and though I have never obviously been a Daryl Metcalf voter, I do feel some responsibility for continuing to send him back to Harrisburg, election after election. And, this is not, I feel like we've had conversations like this about Daryl Metcalf a half a dozen times now in the last year or two. And this is not surprising. But here's the problem, and I think you make a good point about them wanting to change the subject. I think that Republican leadership are more than happy to let Daryl Metcalf have his circus, because it does change the subject. And the instance that you talk about, this is now, I think, last Monday when his House Government Committee had a hearing on the English-only bill, or the bill to make English the official and only language of the state of Pennsylvania. He shut down the first ever Latina representative from Pennsylvania, Leslie Costa, was doing what almost every representative or senator does in a committee hearing before they ask a question, which is they're allowed to take a little bit of time and make a point before they ask a question of the witness.
Right.
And she was doing just that and making some fantastic arguments as to why this is a terrible bill. And he totally shut her down, cut her mic off. It was embarrassing. But on top of that, we come to find out that not one, but two of the folks giving testimony at the hearing, invited by Daryl Metcalf, were the Southern Poverty Law Center has labeled them as white nationalists. And
otherwise known as white supremacists.
Well, not if you ask Daryl Metcalf, because here's the kicker. When he was confronted, I think via email, by Representative Acosta about that, when that came to light after the fact, he publicly, to a reporter, was trying to basically split hairs and say that somebody who's a white nationalist, that's way different than somebody who's a white supremacist, which, by the way, the Southern Poverty Law Center says is total BS. They're used interchangeably. They are one and the same. But he had the gall to publicly, to a reporter, he knew he was on the record, say, actually, there's a huge difference between white supremacists and white nationalists. You can't make this up. You really can't. I mean, it seems like it's out of an Onion article, but this is reality. This is my representative, and that's why I want to apologize personally.
Yeah, well, look, I appreciate you apologizing for it. I don't think that there's anything that we can apologize for with him. I mean, really, it's inexcusable. It's something that should never happen. And the hope is that someone where you live, maybe you, decide to take this. In the
age of Facebook, Rick, there are too many pictures that I don't know how to make go away. But I will say, I think that this district in particular, not to get too far down in the weeds on this, but the district where I live, and I think there are a number of districts that are similar to this. It's changing very quickly. There are new and enlightened people moving into this district, and I know we've talked about this before. And while they might be, fiscally more conservative on some issues, there is no district in the state of Pennsylvania, even as currently constituted in this district, where 50% plus one of the people would hear what Daryl Metcalf did last week and say, yep, that's the kind of person I want representing me in Harrisburg.
Yeah, I mean, there are very few people going, yep, that's my guy, unless maybe you're a white nationalist.
I guess so, but I mean, luckily, I know a lot of my neighbors, and I can tell you that I don't know any of them who are actually white nationalists. So I don't think, again, there is that huge white nationalist constituency that really gets the vote out for Daryl Metcalf every 2 years. I think, though, that we have a whole bunch of people who aren't aware of who Daryl Metcalf is and what he stands for,
Exactly.
and then they don't vote.
I say the same thing about my representative. I've got friends who say, oh, he's a nice guy. I go, yeah, he may be a nice guy, but his votes are insane. I mean, the guy politically is off the rails. And if people knew just how bad his voting record is and the positions that he takes, hopefully they would go, no, I'm not thrilled with that.
Well, there's another component of this that's important too, which is that and we have a petition that we sent out this week. And what we need to have happen is Republican leadership in Harrisburg should be held accountable for this kind of behavior, and they need to reprimand Daryl Metcalf,
yes.
And they don't. So it's a distraction from other things that are going on, and then they cross their fingers and hope that it just can be swept under the rug and goes away. And then they can bring out the Daryl Metcalf circus again in a few more weeks when they need another distraction.
That's just Daryl being Daryl. What can we do?
But that's what you have to. He's not just representing the folks, unfortunately, the folks in the district where I live. When he is the chairman of a committee like this, and you're having a conversation about a very controversial bill, he is representing more than just his constituency in his district.
Yep.
He's representing all of us. He's representing Pennsylvania. And that's where Republican leadership, we should hold their feet to the fire on that.
Yeah, I mean, that story went national. I mean, he's representing us to the world, and people look at it and go, yep, that's the U.S., a bunch of white nationalists.
And he's probably fundraising off of it too.
Well, he is. It's just amazing stuff. And if you want to check out the petitions to help weigh in on the governor's veto, also weigh in on the Daryl Metcalf thing, we've got links at thericksmithshow.com. Just click on John Neurohr's name. Take you right there. Good stuff to get involved with. John, last question. You guys are doing a campaign to kind of bring people in, right?
We are actually. The organization, we're moving to a membership structure. And what that means basically is, we're trying to get folks to be sustaining members for Keystone Progress. And what that means to be a member is that you have a say in the direction of the organization. We're going to have conferences specific to our members. We're going to have great conversations about sort of the issues that we're focused on, and how we can make Pennsylvania a more sustainably progressive state for all of us. So that's another thing to check out. And I should say we're also working on a new website that should be up in a week or two. So hopefully the next time we talk, we'll be able to talk about that new website that we're launching with that should have all kinds of information about all this stuff that we're talking about.
Good stuff. A big rollout that we can all expect. All look forward to. John, I appreciate the time. Thanks so much.
It's great to talk to you as always, Rick.
All righty, John Neurohr, Communication Director over at Keystone Progress. You want to check out their stuff? Go to thericksmithshow.com. Click on John's name. Took you right there. Let's quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. Did you enjoy a cup of coffee to start your day this morning? Well, on this day in labor history, the year was 2007. That was the day that Starbucks agreed to post information about union rights on an employee bulletin board at its store in Grand Rapids, Michigan. The International Workers of the World, or Wobblies, were attempting to organize the baristas at that store. The IWW accused Starbucks of interfering with the right to form a union. Starbucks management consistently points to better than average benefits provided for their employees as a reason against unionization. Starbucks management decided to settle the Grand Rapids dispute by letting the union information to go up before the case went through the full Labor Review Board process. This was just one incidence of the IWW's attempt to organize Starbucks workers. The IWW began its outreach efforts at Starbucks in 2004. One of the most pressing issues facing the baristas was scheduling. Like many in the service industry, they are subject to so-called flexible scheduling. Computer software programs create scheduling aimed at reducing labor costs. The result of these programs is often inconsistent and unpredictable hours. This scheduling makes it difficult for workers to establish a budget or plan for childcare. In 2014, the New York Times published a story on this kind of scheduling, featuring the difficulties faced by one Starbucks worker. In a study published also in 2014, they showed that Starbucks stores had 14% less employees on average in 2011 through 13 than they did in 2005 through 2007. Starbucks is not alone in using computer scheduling. Efforts to cut labor costs continue to have devastating impact on the day-to-day lives of workers in the service economy. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Tales of American Political History with Clinton Porter Hackney.
We've been discussing the change from budget gamesmanship creating government showdowns to shutting it down for political gain. The 16 U.S. government shutdowns prior to 1995 were caused by different factions standing their ground on the way to solving budget problems. However, the Newt Gingrich-led congressional standoff against Clinton was orchestrated to increase support for Republicans and disdain for Clinton and the Democrats, which caused a damaging 21-day shutdown. It was 18 years before anyone tried it again, but it played out just the same. In place of Gingrich was Senator Ted Cruz. In place of the purpose of helping Republicans was the purpose of helping Ted Cruz. And in place of the 1995 damages were 800,000 furloughs, the closing of parks, and the loss of funding for health and nutrition programs. And now, it's Groundhog Day all over again. This is Clinton Porter Hackney at cphackney.com.
Chances are, when you took a shower this morning, an AFSCME member made sure that water was clean. When you drove to work, an AFSCME member maintained the road. When you rode an elevator, an AFSCME member inspected it. I'm David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. AFSCME members enforce regulations, keep prisoners behind bars, take care of patients, protect the environment, and more. The work isn't glamorous, the salaries aren't high, but AFSCME members serve the public in every aspect of our daily lives. Chances are, you'll never see that AFSCME member working in a sewage plant, diving underwater to repair a bridge, or answering a 911 call. But aren't you glad they do? For more information, visit AFSCME13.org. We are AFSCME. We make Pennsylvania happen!
Waving the flag of freedom for people, not corporations. Rick Smith.
So I haven't gotten to this yet, and I got a couple of emails asking about if I was going to talk about it. And really, I hate talking about these shootings. I really do. I hate getting into it, but I got several emails of people going, well, what do you think? And I go, well, I think by now, if you've listened to this program any length of time, you know what I think. I think exactly what we've been hearing out of the president and out of people like Bernie Sanders saying, look, you know, our thoughts and prayers aren't enough, as the president pointed out. As Bernie Sanders said, you know, we're kind of sick and tired of this, of sending condolences to the families of people who have been murdered in cold blood. I think we're kind of all, at least I hope we are. What's frustrating to me, honestly and truthfully, is the finger pointing that's going on. That, well, you know, if a good guy had a gun, what? What are you talking about? Donald Trump saying, well, you know, horrible things happen. You got Jeb Bush saying, yeah, you know, stuff happens. You know, get over it. And nothing gets done. What we do is we go through one of these horrible tragedies happens. We do a whole bunch of finger pointing. You, not you, not you, not you. And nothing gets done. Nothing. And the right wing, you know, they say, oh, we need to arm everybody. Because we've all heard it. You know, the only thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. And I keep asking the same question. How do you know who the good guy with the gun is? Which is why when I saw this story about this guy, John Parker, who is a student at this community college, an Army vet, who at the time was armed, saying, look, I didn't get involved. I could have jumped in the middle of it, been trained to be in these kind of situations. He said, I could have gotten involved, but chose not to because I didn't know where SWAT was, didn't know where the police were, didn't know what their response time was. They see me walking around with a gun. They don't know if I'm the guy. And that's probably the most sane, rational thing I've seen out of all of these stories. Somebody going, I've got a gun. I'm not jumping out in the middle. Let's go hunt them down. Let's not talk about our fetish of shooting somebody. He said, what he did is he went off and, they were going to defend themselves where they were. But he wasn't going looking for anybody because he's right. And the other part of it is you got a whole bunch of people going, let's all start shooting. I keep going, you know what? Maybe we should be pushing back against the insanity that's going on and all of this hyper religiosity. That's where this is coming from. When you've got someone who believes that God's telling me to do this or that, you got problems. Now, all of the reports that I've read, this was a religious motivated situation. Maybe I'm wrong, but all of the stories that I've read said he shot people based on the fact that they were Christians and they were going to see God. And a couple of the right-wing stories that I got wanted me to believe that he was a Muslim and he was going to take them on. We're going to send you to you Christians and it's a Christian holy war and all. At the end of this, man, the sad reality is when you push people to these extremes, they get crazy. And what crazy people do is they get guns. I've read a bunch of studies. I've actually spent, because I'm not someone who instinctively goes, okay, grab all the guns. That's not my thing. I do believe law-abiding citizens should have the right to own a gun if they want, but they have to be responsible for it. It's like the right to own a car. You have the right to own a car, sure, but you got to be responsible with it. You can't go running over people's lawns. You can't go hitting people all over the place. You've got to be responsible and held accountable. Just because you have a right doesn't mean it's an absolute right with no accountability. This is the stuff that drives me insane. We can't even have a rational, sane conversation about this stuff. It's like you've got these two polar opposite camps, and all they do is lob bombs at each other, and the rest of us are going, well, wait a minute. I'm tired of seeing these things. I'm tired of hearing about people who are just trying to get an education ending up dead. People who just wanted to go see a movie ending up dead. People who just wanted to go to church and pray ending up dead. All because why? We've got some crazy religious people. We've got some crazy white nationalist people. We got representatives here in Pennsylvania going, we'll give you a stage, crazy guy. It's insane. It's just nuts. Just nuts. But there, I have addressed it. I think I think we should have some background check. Absolutely. I think we should have screenings for crazy people. Absolutely. I don't believe that we should have mass gun grabbing and all of that. So there's my position. I'm fairly the moderate. But in a world where we're polar opposites, it's the moderates who get bombed from both ends. Nuts. Quick break. Right back with the news. Stick around. You're listening to the Rick Smith Show.
I'll never bend. I'm with you now until the end.
Thought-provoking, intelligent conversation with a heart. The voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
Today, I want to commend China for announcing that it will begin a national market-based cap-and-trade system.
China gets serious about the environment.
Any harm done to the environment is harm to humanity.
Pope Francis calls for a comprehensive UN climate treaty. New report finds the world can move to 100% renewable energy in just 35 years. Plus, Shell pulls the plug on its Arctic drilling adventure.
All of that good news and more straight ahead from bradblog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
Pope, 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 Pope. People lining the route of the motorcade were passing out. And that was just from the fumes from the Volkswagens.
Bless you, Bill Maher. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, have you recovered from the Pope's visit to the U.S.? I know that was a big week for you last week.
Yeah, it was a big deal, but we will get to that next. But first, Shell is giving up its Arctic adventure for now after sinking 7 years and $7 billion into its Arctic offshore drilling project. Royal Dutch Shell announced on Monday that it will cease further exploration off the shores of Alaska for the, quote, foreseeable future. Shell said that an exploratory well found insufficient quantities of oil and gas to justify the expense of further development. Shell also cited challenging federal regulations as a reason for leaving the Arctic.
Well, was it the federal regulations or was it the fact that oil prices have plummeted and they just can't find enough oil up there to justify the expense? In any event, glad it's over for now. The pristine Arctic is saved for now. We'll see what next season brings.
Pope Francis, in his speech to the United Nations General Assembly on Friday, declared that the environment itself has rights and stating that mankind has no authority to abuse or destroy it.
First, it must be stated that a true right of the environment does exist, since the environment itself entails ethical limits, which human activity must acknowledge and respect. Any harm done to the environment is harm to humanity.
Francis also forcefully called on all governments of the United Nations to agree to an ambitious global climate treaty at the final negotiations in Paris in December. And on the same day as the Pope's address, President Obama and Chinese President Xi Jinping announced a new joint vision for that global climate agreement. China will launch a nationwide cap-and-trade program to cut its carbon emissions starting in 2017. Although cap-and-trade mechanisms have succeeded in stopping acid rain and repairing the ozone layer, congressional Republicans rejected similar cap-and-trade legislation in the U.S. back in 2010. At a joint press conference, President Obama said the agreement should be a signal for the rest of the world.
When the world's two largest economies, energy consumers and carbon emitters, come together like this, then there's no reason for other countries, whether developed or developing, to not do so as well. And so this is another major step towards the global agreement the world needs to reach in 2 months' time.
And yet the Republicans in Congress have been for years telling us that China would never do what China has now done.
China and India, all these countries that are still growing, and they're not going to stop doing what they're doing.
The experts agree that a climate policy that does not include massive energy consumers like China and India is essentially meaningless.
We can't do it alone as one nation.
The benefit, I think, is difficult to justify when you realize that it's only us doing it. Nobody else is doing this.
I don't think we can control the emissions from China and India, nor do they have any desire to control.
The United States is a country. It's not a planet.
If we have statements such as we do have from the leaders in China, in India, in other countries saying under no circumstances are they going to accept any kind of mandatory reduction, what are we doing here?
Don't those Republicans ever get tired of being wrong?
And major progress has now been made toward those UN climate treaty negotiations. More countries over the weekend presented their specific commitments to cut emissions tailored to each country's circumstances. Now accounts for 2/3 of global emissions, but experts say it is still not enough and further reductions will be necessary. Finally, Greenpeace has released an analysis showing that the world can achieve 100% renewable energy by 2050 and create 20 million jobs. It's based on current rates of growth in renewable energy. 35 years to 100% renewable energy may sound unrealistic, but it turns out that of all of the organizations projecting global energy growth, Greenpeace has by far been the most accurate.
For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to, please check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Download our reports anytime via Stitcher, TuneIn, or iTunes. Find us and follow us on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. From bradblog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
bloody well right. You got a bloody right to say, right. You're bloody well right. You know you got a right to say.
The most important issues of the day. This is the Rick Smith Show.
Before you come home and tell me you're not angry, and I'll be leaving town.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So if you've been following this Kim Davis thing, and I got to be honest, I had kind of hoped that we were done with the Kim Davis thing. I was kind of hoping that she would go into her hole, back to the trailer park, wherever, and we'd be done with this religious insanity. We'd be done with it. But no. Gonna hold on. There's money to be made. This is one of those weird kind of stories that originally, when I read the first version of it, was that the Pope had wanted Kim Davis to come visit. If you remember this, the very first story by the right wing was that the Pope had specifically wanted Kim Davis to come visit. They had set it up, and it was a secret meeting, one-on-one, and the Pope, basically embraced her and told her to stay strong and stay with her conscience and all of this stuff, being a conscientious objector and all of this. And my LGBT friends, they were kind of freaked out, because for a moment they were going, oh, maybe the Catholic Church is changing its stripes a little bit. Maybe, they're not going to be as hostile as they've been in the past. So you hear all this, and then there's all this back and forth. And I got to be honest, I just kind of step back and I go, that doesn't seem anything close to right to me. It doesn't make a lot of sense. Not that, and I guess this is the best way to put it. I don't really trust anything that comes out of that camp, because ideologically, whatever happens, they're going to skew to their favor. And you understand that from the beginning. And whatever comes from them, you check through filters and with a jaundiced eye of going, well, consider the source. When I was a kid, that's what my mother used to, well, consider the source. Think about where it came from. And then, give it the credit or lack thereof that it deserves. And originally I gave it no credit. This idea that that there was going to be this private meeting that the Pope wanted set up, and that secret, and originally it was, if you remember, originally she was flown there specifically to be right there with right there. Turns out, and this is one of those things where you go, again, consider the source. Turns out that the way it's now being discussed, not in the way of not in the way of an exclusive meeting at the Vatican embassy, but now it's being talked about as, well, she was there on a rope line. Someone got her onto the line, and she was just another in the crowd, and they shook hands, as a number of people would have done. There was no private meeting. There was none of this back and forth. There was big hug and an embrace, and oh, I'm with you. That's how they spun it. They were spinning it as, well, the Pope wanted her to give her encouragement and to keep her on the right track, because he's proud of her, and that's not quite what happened. And you go back to she was on a rope line. And I do find it interesting that now, as the reports are coming out, there was a secret meeting. I shouldn't say secret. There was an individual meeting, but it was with a gay couple. So, you look at this and you go, wait a second. All of the media is the conservative media is trying to push us in this direction that the Pope, he's really not, what he seems. He's really not. Turns out he's had a friend for more than 50 years who he has known is gay and as in a relationship. And that's who he met. Evidently, they were students together back, half a century ago. And, just as the guy said, he's never said anything negative. He's never been judgmental. He's never been any of those things. So it's completely out of character that that he would tell this woman this stuff. And I got to be honest, I didn't even really want to get into it. Other than, I've had a couple of emails with people going, see, that Pope isn't all that you think he is. And look, I'm not a defender of the Catholic Church, especially the Pope's office. But this guy, as I've been saying, there's a lot to this guy that I like. The idea that we can talk about social justice, the idea that we can talk about loving thy neighbor and not being judgmental. Look, at the end of it, what consenting adults do within the confines of their four walls has nothing to do with me. And when I look at someone like Kim Davis, these are the kind of people who, my mother would say points with one finger with the other three pointing back at them. The judgmental who live imperfect lives, who judge others, but never quite look in the mirror. And this is what frustrates me about this stuff. What really frustrates me with all of this push towards hyper religiosity, because once you start going down this path, and this is what I'm really worried about, as we continue walking down this path of we're dividing ourselves up into silos, and you're not Christian enough for my little group, because I've said 1,000 times. What'll be interesting is once we decide that there are no Muslims allowed or Buddhists or any other religion, we're all Christians. That's it. If you're going to come into the U.S., you're a Christian. The fun will then be watching the different sects. You're not crazy enough for me, so bang, you're dead. That's the weird thing. And you look at this shooting, the way it was reported in a couple of the stories that I read, this guy asked people, are you a Christian? Yep. Well, you're going to meet God. Bang. That's the scary stuff. And the more we push in our politics, our political leaders are doing us no favors by having this kind of circus, this kind of insanity, this kind of divisiveness. These are not statesmen. These are not leaders. Honestly and truthfully, these are not leaders. These people, I got to be honest, when I look at some of these folks that I meet, there's something wrong there. When you tell me that I would rather give profits to a corporation, I would rather give tax breaks to corporate interests or to the very wealthy and take food out of the mouths of children, I got to ask, what kind of a sociopath does that? When you say we're going to have a tax plan where we're going to continue to cut, even though we're not making our budgets now. And that how we'll do it is we'll just cut programs, make them go get jobs when they're not there. Seems a little bizarre to me. And the more we have conversations, and hopefully the more we talk about what's going on in the world, the more we come around, hopefully, to the idea that if we just leave each other the hell alone, or as my grandfather always said, don't worry about me, worry about yourself. Take care of yourself. You can love your neighbors, but make sure that you're not the one causing the problems. In my lifetime, all of the people who have been the most trouble are the ones who are pointing their finger at everybody else. I remember this, I'll never forget him. He was one of the big holy rollers at the church that I went to as a kid. On Sunday, his arm is around the priest. On Sundays, the big making a big display out of every motion, every movement, every every opportunity to say, hey, look at me. Yet in our neighborhood, you saw him on Saturday night out on the stroll, looking to pick up, one of the many women of the evening attempting to feed their children. And I guess that's always stuck with me. That here he was, wife, kids, the whole 9 yards, the fake family, the fake, everything out there on the stroll on Saturday nights. But come Sunday, boy, holy rolling. Sadly, those seem to be the people who get elected. Those seem to be the people who are the ones who are running us toward the ground. Sad stuff. But I don't buy the whole the Pope had a secret meeting thing for a second. Didn't believe it from the beginning. Don't believe it now. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, wrap things up, head into the weekend. Looking forward to it. Quick break, right back.
Radio of, for, and by we the working people. The Rick Smith Show.
Democracy is never given to us, but has to be won through constant struggle against elites who keep scheming to siphon ever more of society's money and power from the many into their own hands. A Woody Guthrie song tells this story in one stanza. As through this world I've wandered, I've seen lots of funny men. Some will rob you with a 6-gun, and some with a fountain pen. American democracy is the gritty history of workaday folks who get fed up with the fountain pens, get organized, and get moving to stop the thievery. Gutsy grassroots confrontation is necessary for reclaiming, maintaining, and advancing our democratic values. To see an uplifting example of organized people power in action, look to the Heartland, where a coalition called Iowa Citizens for Community Improvement has been building democracy since 1975, uniting and empowering people of all ethnic backgrounds to push back against the avarice and arrogance of big money corporations. With more than 3,000 dues-paying activist members, CCI is organized in every Iowa county. They've rallied thousands of other Iowans to join their local and statewide actions, including winning battles against factory farm manure polluters, corporate wage thieves that prey on low-wage workers, payday lenders that trap poor people in cycles of debt with 300% interest rates, gas and electric companies that gouge consumers, and banking interests that were either foreclosing on or refusing to lend to good farmers. This is Jim Hightower saying, years ago, I came across a small moving company consisting of only 2 guys and 1 truck. But they had a big can-do attitude, summed up in their advertising slogan, if we can get it loose, we can move it. That's the operating model offered by CCI. Get democracy loose at the grassroots level, and the people themselves will move it forward.
Hightower's commentaries are brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown, the monthly newsletter with Hightower's populist take on what the powers that be are up to. Find out more at hightowerlowdown.org.
From the United Nations, this is your World in 2 Minutes. I'm your host, Luke Vargas, with the Talk Radio News Service. Yesterday, Palestine addressed the UN General Assembly and disavowed treaty commitments with Israel. Today, it was Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's chance to respond.
How can Israel make peace with a Palestinian partner who refuses to even sit at the negotiating table? Israel expects the Palestinian Authority to abide by its commitments. The Palestinians should not walk away from peace.
General Assembly meetings may bring world leaders together, but that rarely translates into political agreement, and that was especially clear on the Iranian nuclear deal.
After 3 days of listening to world leaders praise the nuclear deal with Iran, I begin my speech today by saying, ladies and gentlemen, check your enthusiasm at the door.
Netanyahu suggested ways the international community can continue to guard against Iran, but he expressed little confidence the UN would come rushing to Israel's defense.
Iran's rulers promised to destroy my country, murder my people, and the response from this body the response from nearly every one of the governments represented here has been absolutely nothing. Utter silence. Deafening silence.
Netanyahu waited 43 seconds before continuing his speech.
Perhaps you can now understand why Israel is not joining you in celebrating this deal.
For more global news headlines, visit talkradionews.com.
Would you dive 14 feet deep in the Susquehanna to keep a bridge safe? Would you spend night after night with prisoners to keep your community safe? Would you spend Christmas Eve plowing snow to keep a roof? AFSCME members do. Men and women who choose to serve in public service. Mine inspectors, 911 dispatchers, healthcare workers, parole agents. You may not think about them, but no, they're all thinking about you. This message brought to you by AFSCME Council 13.
These are words you should have told the truth. You're lying in jail, and now we got the proof. Where you gonna run to? Where you gonna? You're running for the door now. No one's getting out alive.
So Sarah sent me an email here in the break, and thank you, Sarah. Saying, love the show, Rick. Thanks. Appreciate all of the thoughts. Always talk about great stuff. Always on point. One thing I have to disagree with. I disagree with your use of the words mental illness. And she goes into this discussion about our use of the words mental illness and how we seem to always fall back on that. It's about the mental illness. It's about people. They're just crazy. And maybe I think she's right. And I stand corrected. Thank you. Appreciate it. That we don't talk about male supremacy. We don't talk about misogyny. We don't talk about the white supremacist. We don't talk about these people who, in all of these cases that you look at, are folks who they're struggling in their lives. They're not the American dream as they've been raised to believe, not there for them. You look at the kid down in South Carolina, high school dropout. The best job he was going to get is a crummy one, thinking, well, they're ruining my life. No, you ding dong, you did that. But it's this belief that they're entitled to so much more. And she makes the point, and I appreciate it, Sarah, that, we've got this mentality, especially among white men, and of which I am one, that we're entitled to so much. And when it doesn't happen, there's a lashing out. And I understand it. I there's a part of me that agrees that's a huge part of it. But I would also say that's partly mental illness as well. That can be identified. But when you've got these right-wing politicians, I don't know that anything's ever going to get done. And that's the frustrating part. Before we wrap up and hit the weekend, George sent me a great story titled The 13 Most Punchable Faces in America, of which Ted Cruz, evidently, according to this article, has the most punchable face in the entire country. And I've been seeing a lot of stories here that Ted not only going to be out of the presidential race soon, potentially out of the Senate as well. And I think that would hopefully be a step in the right direction. The number 2 most punchable face in the nation, Bill Kristol, the media pundit. Then a guy named Mark Halperin. He is another media pundit, political editor. That little smarmy, with the drug story a couple weeks ago. His name, Martin Sheckley. The one who bought the drug company that was, you could get the age drugs or the component of it for like $3, and he jacked it up, 5,500%. He has a very punchable face. And then you go down the list, Eric Cantor, that Jesse Waters from the what's his name, Bill O'Reilly show, that Walter Palmer, the guy who shot the lion, Jason Chavitz, the idiot from the Planned Parenthood hearing, and a couple of others that I don't know, the rest of them down the list, I guess you could argue with. But those most certainly very punchable faces. So thank you, George, for the email. And you too, Sarah, as well. Thanks so much. Hope everyone has a great weekend. Looking forward to, got lots of stuff planned. If it doesn't rain too much and the hurricane doesn't take too much away. But thanks for being here. Had a great week. Hopefully the voice will be back next week. Thanks for being here. We'll see you on Monday.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Together, we can make America better. Email rick@thericksmithshow.com or interact with us anytime at thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
It's coming like the tide of flood beneath the lunar sway. Imperial, mysterious, in amorous array. Democracy is coming to the USA.